Hey everyone, tonight we are going to trace the invisible lines that connect your morning cup of joe to the massive, complex financial safety nets that keep the modern world from collapsing. We're going to see how a bunch of hyperactive goats in Ethiopia inadvertently kickstarted an economic revolution that led to ship insurance, stock markets, and the global economy as we know it. Imagine the steam rising from a dark, bitter cup, the clatter of porcelain in a dimly lit room, and the scratching of quills that decided the fate of empires. It's a story of addiction, gossip, and high-stakes gambling disguised as prudent business. But let's be honest, if you had to drink the coffee they were brewing back in the 16th century, basically hot, gritty sludge that felt like swallowing a charcoal briquette, you probably wouldn't. Tea survived this journey without a serious amount of sugar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, drop your location and the current time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on a ridge in the Kaffa province of Ethiopia. It is sometime around the year 850 CE, though time feels a bit fluid up here in the highlands. The air is thin, crisp, and smells faintly of wet earth and wild juniper. You aren't an emperor or a merchant. You are a goat herder named Kaldi, or at least you're shadowing him. The job is usually pretty monotonous. It involves a lot of walking, a lot of staring at the horizon, and a lot of trying to convince stubborn animals not to walk off cliffs. But today, the rhythm is off. You look down into the valley and notice that the goats are undoing their usual routine of grazing and ignoring you. They are acting weird, and by weird, I mean they look like they've just discovered techno music about 1,000 years too early. They are bleating louder than usual, prancing on their hind legs, and butting heads with a vigor that suggests they feel invincible. It's a mosh pit of livestock. You trudge down the slope, your sandals slipping on the damp grass, trying to figure out what kind of madness has infected the herd. You get close to an older billy goat usually. The grumpy stoic of the group hand, see his eyes are wide, his pupils dilated. He's practically vibrating. You follow his gaze to a cluster of shrubs with glossy, dark green leaves and bright red berries. They look innocent enough, like oversized cherries. This brings us to the cornerstone of coffee lore, the legend of Kaldi. It is the mainstream historical fact that everyone cites, the patient zero moment of caffeine. Kaldi, bewildered by his dancing goats, decides that if the fruit doesn't kill the animals, it probably won't kill him. You watch as hand by extension, you plucks a handful of these red cherries. You pop one in your mouth, the skin is tough, the pulp is sweet and slimy, and there's a hard seed in the middle. You chew on it, swallow the juice, and wait. At first, nothing happens. You just feel like a guy eating raw fruit in a field. But then, the edges of your vision sharpen. The fog in your brain, the one that usually settles in around mid-afternoon, evaporates. Your heart beats a little faster, a drum kick matching the erratic dancing of the goats. You feel a sudden, inexplicable urge to run up the hill, maybe compose a poem, or perhaps organize the pebbles on the path by size. It's the world's first caffeine buzz, and frankly, it feels like magic. Now, historians still argue whether Kaldi was a real person, or just a convenient narrative device invented later to explain the discovery. Some scholars suggest that the Oromo people, an ethnic group indigenous to the region, had been utilizing the coffee bean long before any lone herder had a revelation, mixing the ground beans with animal fat to create high-energy protein bars for long treks. Essentially, the ancient version of a 5-hour energy shot, but with more lard. But let's stick with Kaldi for a moment because his story takes you to the next crucial step, the institution. You gather a tunic full of these magic berries and literally run because you have limitless energy now to the nearby monastery. You figure that if this fruit provides this much vitality, it must be a gift from the divine, meant to help the holy men in their duties. You burst into the monastery, breathless, presenting your red treasure to the head monk. You explain the dancing goats, the clarity, the energy. The monk, however, is less impressed. He's a man of tradition, and he takes one look at your jittery, wide-eyed expression and declares the berries to be the devil's work. It's a classic middle management overreaction. He snatches the berries from your hands and throws them directly into the fire, intending to destroy the sinful fruit before it can corrupt the brotherhood. And this is where the universe intervenes with a bit of chemistry. As the berries hit the coals, the moisture inside them evaporates. The sugars begin to caramelize. The Maillard reaction kicks in. Within moments, the room isn't filled with the acrid smoke of burning trash. It's filled with an aroma that is rich, nutty, and intoxicating. It's the smell of a Sunday morning, centuries before Sunday mornings were a thing. It is the smell of roasting coffee. You watch as the other monks drift into the room, noses in the air, drawn by the scent like cartoon characters, floating on a visible odor trail. The head monk, realizing that anything smelling this good probably can't be entirely evil, or perhaps just realizing he made a mistake, orders the beans to be raked out of the fire. Here, a quirky little tidbit for you. The first coffee was a filtered brew, or an espresso. It was likely a decoction. To save the beans from burning further, they were crushed and thrown into a pot of boiling water, creating a thick, dark liquor. It wasn't the smooth latte you grab at the drive-thru. It was a gritty suspension of burnt organic matter. You sit there in the flickering candlelight as the monks tentatively sip the brew. Faces scrunch up at the bitterness, but then the effects kick in. The fatigue of the day lifts. The prayers that usually felt like a marathon of endurance suddenly seem manageable. The monks realize that this devil-esque drink has a very practical application. It eliminates the natural human need for sleep. This moment is pivotal. You are witnessing the transition of coffee from a biological curiosity to a tool of productivity. Before this, the rhythm of the human world was dictated entirely by the sun. When it got dark, you slept, because you couldn't see anything and your body shut down. But now, with a cup of this dark broth, you can hack your own biology. You can cheat the circadian rhythm as you leave the monastery and step back out into the cool Ethiopian night. The stars seem brighter, or maybe you're just more awake to see them. The goats have finally crashed, sleeping in a pile, exhausted from their drug-fueled rave. You look at the horizon, toward the Red Sea. You don't know it yet, but that handful of berries is going to travel. It's going to cross the water to Yemen, then up to Mecca, then to Istanbul, and finally into the heart of Europe. It will spark revolutions, fuel the Enlightenment, and create the environment necessary for people to sit down, stop fighting, and start calculating risk. The world is about to speed up. The slow, agrarian drift of history is getting a turbo boost, all because a goat decided to eat a weird red berry. But first, the bean has to cross the sea. You leave the cool, verdant highlands of Ethiopia behind. The air grows heavier, saltier, and significantly hotter as you cross the Red Sea. You are drifting toward the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, landing in a port city that will become synonymous with chocolate-flavored lattes centuries later. Though right now, it's just a bustling, dusty harbor called Al-Mukka or Mocha. The year has shifted forward a few centuries, landing somewhere in the mid-1400s. You step off a wooden dhow onto the sun-baked docks of Yemen. The chaos here is different from the pastoral confusion of the goats. It's the organized chaos of trade spices, incense, textiles, and lately, sacks of those hard greenish-green beans you saw Kaldi playing with. You find yourself walking through the narrow, winding streets of the city as dusk settles. In most of the medieval world, this is the time to pack it in. Without streetlights or neon signs, night means sleep. But here, there is a low hum of activity coming from a specific building near the edge of town. It's a Sufi lodge, a place for mystics who dedicate their lives to spiritual closeness with the divine. You slip inside. The room is dimly lit by oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows against the plaster walls. Men are sitting in a circle, swaying rhythmically, chanting the names of God. This is the Dhikr, a ritual of remembrance that is supposed to go on for hours, deep into the dead of night. Usually, biology would intervene about 45 minutes into this. Eyelids would droop, heads would nod, and the spiritual connection would be severed by the very human need to snore. But tonight, there is a large communal bowl being passed around the circle. You watch as it comes to you. The liquid inside is dark, steaming, and smells earthy, not quite like the refined roast of a modern espresso, but undeniably coffee. This is kawa. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Sufis of Yemen were the first to systematically use coffee, not just as medicine, but as a tool for religious endurance. They realized that this wine of Araby didn't intoxicate the mind like alcohol. It sharpened it. It stripped away the veil of fatigue. You take a sip, it's incredibly bitter. They haven't quite figured out the sugar ratio yet, and they often boil the husks along with the beans, a drink called kisha, which tastes a bit like spicy, gingery tea mixed with battery acid. But you drink it anyway because everyone else is doing it, and peer pressure is a timeless phenomenon. Almost immediately, you feel that familiar jolt. The synapses in your brain start firing like they've been hooked up to a car battery. The chanting around you intensifies. The men aren't just awake, they are hyperlucid. You realize you are witnessing the invention of the night shift. Before this moment, the night belonged to the sleepers and the criminals. Now, it belongs to the thinkers. There is a quirky linguistic tidbit here that you should appreciate while you try to stop your hands from shaking. The word they use, kawa, originally referred to wine. It was a term for something that suppresses the appetite. By appropriating the word for alcohol, these mystics were making a bold statement. This is the sober man's wine, while the Europeans are getting drunk on beer and wine because their water is full of cholera. The Islamic world is getting high on caffeine and doing complex algebra. Historians still argue about the botany of this moment. Some scholars claim the coffee plant was indigenous to Yemen all along, hiding in the mountains, waiting to be discovered. Others insist it was strictly an Ethiopian transplant brought over by traders or enslaved people, and that the Yemenis were simply the first to cultivate it essentially as a cash crop. Regardless of who planted the first bush, the Sufis are the ones who turned it into a ritual. You look around the room and notice something profound. The coffee isn't just keeping them awake, it's creating a shared mental state. They are vibrating on the same frequency. In a world without electric light, extending the day is a superpower. You are watching humans hack their own hardware to run software prayer. In this case, that requires more RAM than they naturally possess. But here, the reality check, you probably wouldn't survive. The caffeine content in this boil is likely staggering. There is no filtration, no regulation. You are drinking straight sludge. If you have a sensitive stomach or a heart condition, this Sufi prayer circle might be your last. Your heart would be beating so fast it would sound like a drum solo, and you'd likely be sweating profusely despite the cool night air. As the night wears on, the bowl is refilled. The chanting grows louder, more ecstatic. You realize that this drink is doing something dangerous. It is decoupling human activity from the sun. For thousands of years, the sun was the boss. Sun up, work, sun down, stop, coffee just fired the sun. This has consequences beyond the monastery walls. If a monk can stay awake to pray, a sentry can stay awake to guard. A scholar can stay awake to read. A merchant can stay awake to count coins. You step out of the lodge as the first light of dawn bleeds into the sky. Usually, you'd be groggy, rubbing sleep from your eyes. Instead, you feel wired, perhaps a bit anxious, your mind racing with ideas. You walk back toward the port. The sacks of coffee beans are being loaded onto ships now. The secret is out. The Sufis couldn't keep this to themselves. Travelers, pilgrims, and traders visiting the holy cities of Mecca and Medina encounter this black broth. Drink it to survive the long night prayers, and then think, hey, this would be great for when I have to listen to my uncle tell that same story about his fishing trip. The bean is moving north. It's traveling up the coast of the Red Sea, heading for the heart of the Ottoman Empire. You follow the trade routes, hitching a ride on a camel caravan or a merchant vessel. You are leaving the religious sphere now. Coffee is about to graduate from the monastery to the metropolis. As you travel, you notice the landscape changing from the arid coast of Yemen to the bustling cosmopolitan highways of the Ottoman lands. The drink is changing too. It's becoming less of a religious aid and more of a social lubricant. People are starting to roast the beans darker, grind them finer. They are inventing the sezb, that long-handled copper pot designed to create a thick foam on top. You are heading toward a city that straddles two continents, a city that acts as the doorway between the East and the West. It is the jewel of the world. Constantinople recently renamed Istanbul, and it is there, amidst the domes and the minarets, that coffee will stop being just a drink and start becoming a place, a physical location where you go to consume it. The concept of the living room is about to be outsourced. You are about to witness the birth of the public sphere. So, grab your copper pot and prepare your stomach lining, because we are about to walk through the gates of the world's first true coffee house. You step off a merchant vessel and onto the wooden docks of the Golden Horn. The year is roughly 1555. You have arrived in Istanbul, the beating heart of the Ottoman Empire, and frankly, the center of the known world. If Yemen was the laboratory, this is the showroom. The city is a sensory assault. the smell of roasting lamb, the salt spray of the Bosphorus, the shouting of vendors in a dozen languages, and the majestic silhouette of the Hagia Sophia dominating the skyline. You navigate through the crowds, dodging porters carrying crates of silk and spices, until you reach the district of Tahtakale. It's a bustling commercial quarter, buzzing with the energy of trade. But you're not here to buy rugs or copper pots. You are here to witness a grand opening that will change the social fabric of humanity forever. To Syrian merchants, Hakoum from Aleppo and Shams from Damascus have just set up shop here. They've brought with them bales of that dark bean you tasted in Yemen. But they have a radical new business idea. In the past, if you wanted to consume something, you bought it and took it home. Or you stood in a tavern and drank it quickly before a bar fight broke out. Hakoum and Shams are selling something else. They are selling permission to loiter. You walk up to the entrance of what is recorded as the world's first dedicated coffee house, the Kivahan. It doesn't look like a modern cafe with minimalist furniture and an indie folk playlist. It looks like the living room of a wealthy uncle who really likes carpets. You kick off your dusty sandals at the door of mandatory Ruland, step onto thick plush rugs. The air is thick, not with tobacco smoke yet. That vice is arriving soon. But with the heavy, nutty aroma of roasting coffee and the scent of rosewater. You find a spot on a low divan sinking into the cushions. This is the first thing you notice. Comfort. Taverns were designed to be uncomfortable, so you de-drink your ale and leave to make room for the next paying customer. Here, the furniture screams, "Stay a while. Tell us about your problems." A server approaches, carrying a copper tray. He hands you a small, handleless cup known as a fincan, nestled inside a metal holder so you don't burn your fingers. The liquid is thick, black, and has a layer of foam on top that looks like volcanic sludge. This is the precursor to modern Turkish coffee. It hasn't been filtered. The grounds are still in the cup, settling at the bottom like a layer of silt in a riverbed. Mainstream history records Hakoum and Shams as the pioneers who brought this concept to the capital, turning a regional Yemeni habit into a cosmopolitan necessity. They charged a nominal fee for the coffee, but the real product was the space. For the price of a single cup, you rented a spot in the center of the empire. You take a sip, it is aggressively strong. Sugar is still an expensive luxury, so this brew is often served plain or with spices like cardamom or mastic to cut the bitterness. It coats your tongue. Your eyes widen. The traveler next to you, a man with an intricate turban and ink-stained fingers, leans in. He's not drunk, he's wired. He challenges you to a game of backgammon. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In these early days, coffee was affectionately nicknamed the milk of chess players and thinkers. It was the antidote to alcohol. Alcohol makes you sloppy, emotional, and bad at strategy. Coffee makes you sharp, paranoid, and intensely focused on crushing your opponent. You look around the room and see dozens of games in progressman kala, backgammon, chess. The sound of the room isn't the slurred singing of a pub. It's the sharp clack-lack-lack of game pieces and the rapid-fire patter of debate. However, historians still argue whether Hakoum and Shams actually invented the coffee house or if they simply franchised a model that had already quietly existed in Cairo or Mecca a decade prior. Some scholars suggest that coffee tents were common in the Arab world during fairs, and the duo in Istanbul just brick-and-mortared the concept. But regardless of who laid the first brick, Istanbul is where the concept went viral. You sit back, watching the room fill up. It's a demographic mixer that shouldn't exist in a stratified society. You see Janissaries, the elite soldiers of the Sultan, sitting next to Jewish merchants. You see poets arguing with clerics. You see Persian travelers exchanging gossip with Greek sailors. In the street, these people would pass each other with suspicion. Here, under the influence of the bean, they are just customers. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the hygiene standards of the Kivahan. The cups are rinsed in a communal bucket of water that gets murkier by the hour. The concept of germ theory is still 3 centuries away. You are sharing saliva with half of Constantinople. If the guy playing backgammon 3 tables over has a cold, congratulations, now you have a cold. As the caffeine hits your bloodstream, you feel the vibe of the room shift. It's electric. This isn't just a place to rest, it's a place to perform. People are reciting poetry aloud. Someone is telling a story about the palace intrigue. News is traveling faster here than it ever could by official decree. You realize that Hakoum and Shams have accidentally created a third place. It's not home the first place, and it's not work the second place. It is a neutral ground where status is determined not by your birth, but by your wit. If you can tell a funny story or win a chess match, you are the king of the coffee house for an hour. The success of Kivahan is immediate and explosive. Within years, there won't be just one coffee house. There will be hundreds. They will spread through the city like a contagion. The authorities, initially pleased that people are drinking coffee instead of forbidden wine, will soon start to look at these crowded rooms with suspicion. Why? Because when people are drunk, they pass out. When people are caffeinated, they talk. And eventually, they talk about the government. You finish your cup, careful not to swallow the mud at the bottom, unless you want to tell your fortune, which becomes a popular side hustle here. You feel a buzzing in your limbs that makes you want to argue about philosophy. You are ready to engage. You are ready to learn. You stand up and move deeper into the room, toward a circle of men who aren't playing games. They are holding papers. They are reading aloud. You are about to see why these establishments earned a new, more dangerous nickname. You have graduated from the sensory experience of the drink to the intellectual danger of the environment. Welcome to the School of the Wise. You push past the backgammon tables and the clinking cups, drawn toward the corner of the coffee house where the air feels heavier, charged with something more volatile than caffeine. You are walking into a cloud of words. This section of the room isn't about leisure. It's about learning, but not the kind you get in a mosque or a madrasa. This is the School of the Wise, or Mektebi Irfan. The term itself is a mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman coffee houses weren't just Starbucks prototypes. They were informal universities for the unwashed masses. In a world where literacy was low and books were painstakingly hand-copied luxuries for the rich, the coffee house was the poor man's library. You squeeze onto a bench next to a man with a thick beard and a worn coat. He looks like a scholar who hasn't been paid in 6 months. In the center of the circle stands a meta, a traditional storyteller. But he's not just recounting fairy tales of jinns and magic carpets. He's holding a manuscript. He reads a line of poetry, then stops to explain it, breaking down the metaphors for the crowd. You watch the faces around you. There are illiterate laborers, artisans, and off-duty soldiers. They are listening with rapt attention. This is an oral transmission of high culture. You realize that for the price of a coffea, few copper coins you are getting an education that was previously gated behind the walls of elite institutions. But it's not just poetry. You lean in closer. The conversation shifts. A man in a dusty traveler's cloak starts talking about news from the frontier. He describes a battle that didn't go as well as the official town criers claimed. He talks about corruption in the local tax office. He pulls out a handwritten pamphlet, a satirical cartoon mocking a local pashand, passes it around. This is the dangerous part. You are witnessing the birth of public opinion. Before the coffeehouse news was whatever the Sultan said it was. If the Sultan said the sky was green, you nodded and praised his colored perception. But here, in the caffeine-fueled haze, people are fact-checking. They are comparing notes. The Sultan says the harvest was good, but my cousin in Anatolia says they are eating boiled grass. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Coffee houses became the primary distribution centers for literature, but also for shadow theater or karogs. These were puppet shows projected onto a backlit screen. They seemed like harmless slapstick entertainment, Punch and Judy style, but the puppets were often used to deliver scathing political satire that no human actor would dare speak aloud. A puppet can call the Grand Vizier an idiot and get away with it. A human would lose his head. You watch a shadow play unfold in the corner. The main character, a rough peasant named Karogs, is outsmarting a pompous, educated aristocrat. The crowd roars with laughter. It's cathartic. It's a pressure valve for a society that has very few outlets for dissent. Historians still argue whether the coffee house actually caused literacy to rise, or if it just provided a venue for the already literate to show off. Some scholars believe the School of the Wise nickname was a bit tongue-in-cheek, a sarcastic jab at the fact that most of the wisdom dispensed here was idle gossip and conspiracy theories. Think of it less like Harvard and more like a Reddit thread in 1570. But you can feel the threat this poses to the established order. In a mosque, you listen to the imam. In the palace, you listen to the sultan. In the coffee house, everyone speaks. It is a cacophony of unauthorized voices. It is an egalitarian nightmare for an autocratic regime. You start to feel a little paranoid yourself. You look at the door. Who is listening? That quiet guy in the corner, sipping his coffee, without smiling, is he a spy? The Sultan has eyes and ears everywhere, and a room full of wired, chatty men is a magnet for informants. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive the intellectual rigor here. If you tried to chime in with a half-baked opinion, you'd likely be roasted pun intended by a Sufi poet or a cynical merchant who has traveled more miles than you walked in your life. These men value wit and rhetoric. It's a rap battle of logic. If you can't keep up, you're just noise. As the night deepens, the topics get riskier. They start debating religion, not just politics. They discuss the nature of the soul, the interpretation of texts. These are conversations that could get you branded a heretic in the wrong company. But the coffee buzz makes you feel invincible. It makes you feel like you can solve the mysteries of the universe if you just have one more cup. The School of the Wise is doing something critical. It is creating a standardized culture. People from different provinces are meeting here, swapping dialects, swapping stories. The coffee house is homogenizing the Ottoman identity, creating a shared sense of what it means to be a citizen of this empire, distinct from just being a subject of the ruler. You finish your coffee. The grounds at the bottom of your cup form a dark, muddy grimace. You realize that this freedom can't last. The powers that be are watching. The Sultan is sitting in his palace, looking down at the city, seeing the lights of the coffee houses burning late into the night, and he is not happy. He knows that hungry people riot, but caffeinated, well-informed people revolt. The clampdown is coming. You can feel it in the air. The golden age of the School of the Wise is about to run headfirst into the paranoia of a tyrant. The mood in the room is joyous now, but outside, the storm clouds are gathering. You stand up to leave, your head buzzing with poetry and treason. You step out into the cool night air of Istanbul, but you have a feeling you're being watched, and you're right, because the man on the throne isn't just annoyed by the noise, he's terrified of the silence that happens when the talking stops and the plotting begins. We are about to meet Murad IV. You are now walking the streets of Istanbul at night, but the vibe has shifted dramatically. The year is 1633. The relaxed, cosmopolitan buzz of the earlier era has been replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. You keep your head down. The shadows of the narrow alleyways seem deeper, more menacing. You aren't just a tourist anymore. You are walking through a city under martial law, imposed by a ruler who has decided that your caffeine habit is a capital offense. You are living under the reign of Sultan Murad IV. Murad is a man of extremes. He is a giant, physically imposing, known for wielding a mace that weighs 132 pounds, and for his ability to decapitate a bull with a single stroke of his sword. He ascended the throne as a child during a time of chaos and rebellion, which has left him with a profound, violent need for control. And right now, his target isn't a foreign army or a rebel general, it is the coffee cup in your hand. You turn a corner and see a sight that freezes your blood. A group of soldiers is dragging a man out of a small, nondescript shop. The shop smells faintly of roasted beans. The man is pleading, but it's useless. He is executed on the spot, his body left as a grim warning to the neighborhood. His crime, selling coffee. This is a mainstream historical fact. Murad IV instituted a total ban on coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. He believed these substances were the root of all sedition. He argued, not incorrectly, that coffee houses were gathering spots for malcontents to complain about his rule. So, his solution was simple: close the houses and kill the drinkers. But here's the part that feels like a horror movie. You watch from the shadows as a figure moves through the street. He is dressed not in the royal kaftan, but in the rough, unassuming clothes of a commoner. He walks with a heavy, deliberate gait. This is Murad himself. The Sultan had a terrifying hobby. At night, he would prowl the streets of Istanbul in disguise, wielding a massive broadsword. He would hunt for the telltale glow of a fire, the smell of smoke, or the aroma of coffee. If he found an illicit shop open, he wouldn't call the guards. He would reveal himself the shadow of God on earth and personally behead the owner and the patrons. You realize the stakes have changed. Drinking coffee isn't just a social activity anymore, it is an act of extreme rebellion. It is a game of Russian roulette where the bullet is a 6-foot sultan with anger management issues. But here's the quirky tidbit. Despite the piles of heads in the river of blood, people didn't stop drinking coffee. They just went underground. The coffee house moved from the street corner to the cellar. It became a speakeasy. You slip into a hidden basement through a trap door in a rug shop. The air is thick, hot, and airless. People are huddled around a small brazier, whispering. The addiction was stronger than the fear of death. This is the power of the bean. You watch men risking their lives for a hit of caffeine and a conversation. The danger makes the bond tighter. The school of the wise hasn't closed. It has just become the school of the survivors. Historians still argue about the true motivation behind Murad's fury. Was it really about the sedition? Or was it about the Great Fire of Istanbul in 1633? A fire had devastated a huge portion of the city, and rumor had it that the blaze started in a coffee house by the harbor. Likely from a careless smoker, tobacco and coffee were inseparable by this point. Murad used the fire as a pretext to ban the substances that caused it. It was a convenient excuse to crush the social networks that threatened him. You huddle in the corner of this clandestine basement. The coffee tastes different. Hear it, tastes like fear. It's rushed. You gulp it down, eyes darting to the trapdoor every time a floorboard creaks above. You realize that by banning coffee, Murad has inadvertently politicized it even further. Before, it was just a drink. Now, it is a symbol of resistance. Every sip is a silent screw you to the autocrat. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive this. If Murad walked in right now, your modern sense of entitlement, I have rights, would get you killed instantly. There is no due process here. There is only the sword. You would need to be invisible, silent, and incredibly lucky to make it out of 1633 alive. The irony is palpable. Murad is trying to stamp out the architecture of gossip by destroying the physical spaces. But he fails to understand that the network isn't the building, it's the habit. You can burn the wood, but you can't burn the addiction. The more he oppresses the coffee drinkers, the more they bond together in secret. Eventually, Murad dies of cirrhosis of the liver, ironically, or perhaps gout, despite his bans on alcohol. His successors, realizing that you can't kill everyone in the capital, eventually lift the ban. They realize something that modern governments would later learn. It is better to tax a vice than to ban it. As the ban lifts, the coffee houses re-emerge, blinking into the sunlight. But they have changed. They have survived a trauma. They are more resilient now, and more importantly, the design of the coffee house begins to evolve. It stops being just a room with rugs and starts becoming a purpose-built machine for social interaction. You climb out of the basement, breathing in the fresh air. The fear is lifting, but the lesson remains. Coffee is powerful enough to scare an emperor. You walk through the city as it rebuilds. New coffee houses are going up, and this time they are being designed with intention. You are about to see the golden age of Ottoman coffee house architecture. It's not just about sitting, it's about seeing and being seen. The layout itself is going to teach us something about how information flows. So, let's wipe the dust off our clothes and walk into the newly legalized, architecturally optimized coffee house of the late 17th century. You walk into a newly built coffee house in the Buyaklu district, sometime in the late 1600s. The fear of Murad's sword has faded into a dark memory, replaced by a renaissance of leisure. But this isn't the chaotic rug-strewn room of the early days. This is a designed space. You are looking at the physical manifestation of a social network built out of wood, stone, and fountains. The architecture here is not accidental. It is a machine for maximizing gossip. You step through the entrance and notice the layout immediately. The room is square or rectangular, with a high ceiling to let the smoke rise. But the key feature is the seating. Along the walls run raised platforms called cedars, covered in carpets and cushions. This creates a gallery effect. Everyone is facing inward. In a modern cafe, you sit at a small table, often facing a wall or your laptop, isolated in a bubble of privacy. Here, privacy is the enemy. The design forces you to look at everyone else. You are on display. You scan the room. You can see who is talking to whom. You can see who is sitting alone. You can see who is wearing new silk and who is wearing threadbare wool. In the center of the room, there is often a small fountain or a pool. The sound of trickling water provides a soothing acoustic backdrop, a white noise that allows for confidential conversations to happen without being overheard by the entire room, while still maintaining the visual connection. It's a brilliant piece of acoustic engineering privacy in a crowd. You take a seat on the raised platform. You feel like a spectator in a theater, but you are also the actor. A server brings your coffee, and you lean back. From your vantage point, you can survey the entire social hierarchy of the neighborhood. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. The layout of the Ottoman coffee house was egalitarian in theory, but hierarchical in practice. While anyone could enter, where you sat mattered. The spots near the central hearth or the fountain were prime real estate, often reserved for the elders or the local notables. The corners were for the quiet ones. The spots near the door were for the transients. But the open plan meant that information flowed without barriers. A merchant shouting about the price of silk in the corner could be heard by the sea captain sitting by the window. A poet reciting a verse near the hearth could be heckled by a soldier at the entrance. The architecture dissolved the silos of society. Here's a quirky tidbit. These spaces were often open to the street. Large windows or open facades meant that the coffee house wasn't a sealed bunker. It was a porch that extended into the city. Passersby could lean in and join a conversation without even buying a drink. It was a porous membrane between the private and the public. You watch a heated debate erupt in the center of the room. Two men are arguing about the interpretation of a dream. In a private home, this would be a quiet chat. Here, it's a spectator sport. The audience chimes in. That's not a snake, you idiot. It represents a journey. The architecture turns every conversation into a town hall meeting. Historians still argue about the role of the barbers in these spaces. Often, coffee houses doubled as barbershops. You could get a shave, a tooth pulled, and a caffeine fix in the same chair. It was a one-stop shop for male grooming and anxiety. This added another layer to the gossip. Nothing loosens a tongue like a razor at the throat and a captive audience. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the lack of personal space. If you are the type of person who puts headphones on to avoid talking to your Uber driver, this environment would be your personal hell. There is no checking out. If you are here, you are participating. If you stare at your hands, someone will ask you what's wrong. If you look happy, someone will ask you why. It is a relentless, extroverted pressure cooker. You notice something else about the design. The preparation area, the okak, is visible. It's not hidden in a back kitchen. You can see the kvetchi, the coffee maker, brewing the pots. This transparency builds trust. You know exactly what's going into your cup. In a city rife with rumors of poison and adulterated goods, seeing the process is vital. As you sit there, absorbing the noise and the smoke, you realize that this building is an analog internet. The layout is the interface. The cedars are the chat rooms. The central fountain is the news feed. The server moving between tables is the data packet, carrying messages and refills. The information traveling through this room is getting faster and more accurate because of the peer review system. If a man claims he saw a mermaid in the Bosphorus, 3 sailors will immediately call him a liar. The collective intelligence of the room filters the data. This architectural openness has a profound economic effect. Trust is being manufactured here. You see 2 men shake hands near the fountain. They just closed a deal based on verbal agreement, witnessed by the entire room. The coffee house provides the social collateral that makes business possible in a low-regulation environment. You finish your coffee and stand up, stretching your legs. You've seen the hardware, the building itself. Now at S, time to look at the software, the people using it to change the world of commerce. You are going to zoom in on a specific group of patrons who are turning these cushions into the first corporate offices. The merchant doesn't have an office building. He doesn't have a conference room. He has a table at the coffee house. And that table is about to become the most important desk in the empire. You are sitting on the cedar in the coffee house, watching the smoke curl toward the high ceiling when a man in a fine silk caftan sits down next to you. He doesn't look like a poet or a lounger. He has a ledger under his arm and a look of calculated stress on his face. He orders a coffee, not to enjoy it, but to fuel the negotiation he is about to conduct. You are witnessing the coffee house turn into the merchant's living room. In the 17th century, there are no office towers in Istanbul. There are no co-working spaces with ergonomic chairs and motivational posters. If you are a trader dealing in spices from India or textiles from Bursa, your office is wherever you can find a seat, and the best seat is here. The merchant opens his ledger on the low table. Another man joins, Hima, rougher-looking character, likely a caravan leader. They start haggling. They aren't shouting, they are murmuring. The coffee arrives. They sip. The bitterness of the brew sets the tone. Serious, alert, businesslike. This is a mainstream historical fact. For centuries, the Ottoman coffee house served as the primary commercial hub for traders who lacked physical storefronts. It was neutral ground. If you invited a business partner to your home, The hospitality laws required you to treat them like a king, which made hard bargaining awkward. If you went to their home, you were at a disadvantage. But here, you are equals. You both paid for your coffee. The playing field is level, you watch the dance. The merchant offers a price. The caravan leader laughs, feigning insult. He threatens to leave. He doesn't leave. He just orders another coffee. This is part of the ritual. The caffeine keeps them sharp, but the setting keeps them civil. They can't pull knives on each other with 20 witnesses watching from the surrounding benches. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The coffeehouse owners, the kavachis, often acted as unofficial banks and mailrooms. A merchant could leave a bag of gold with the owner for safekeeping, or have letters delivered to the coffeehouse with the green awning instead of a home address. The kavachi was the trusted node in the network, the neutral third party who held the keys to the commercial community. You see the merchant hand over a small pouch of coins to the owner, who locks it in a sturdy wooden chest behind the brewing station. Trust is the currency here, even more than the gold. If a merchant cheats someone in the coffeehouse, the news spreads instantly. His reputation is incinerated before he can finish his cup. The social pressure of the School of the Wise acts as a regulatory body. Historians still argue about the extent of this commercial usage. Some claim that specific coffeehouses catered to specific trades: a coffeehouse for janissaries, a coffeehouse for firemen, a coffeehouse for Armenian silk merchants. It wasn't just a general mix, it was a segmented market. You went to the specific venue where your industry hung out. It was like LinkedIn groups, but with more smoke and less humble bragging. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the stress of this office. There are no contracts, no lawyers, no HR department to complain to if someone is mean to you. A deal is a handshake and a prayer. If the caravan gets raided by bandits, you lose everything. The anxiety in the room is palpable. These men are gambling their livelihoods on the safety of roads they can TC and the honesty of men they barely know. You notice the merchant writing something on a scrap of paper. He hands it to a runner, a young boy waiting by the door. The boy takes the paper and sprints out into the street. This is the primitive text message. The merchant is coordinating with the docks, checking inventory, sending instructions. The coffeehouse is the command center. As you watch this transaction conclude hands shaken, coffee finished, you realize that the office isn't a place, it's a state of mind facilitated by the bean. The coffee provides the focus. The house provides the witness. Together, they create a commercial ecosystem that is flexible, decentralized, and incredibly efficient. But this system is about to be disrupted by war. The Ottoman Empire is expanding, pushing westward, bringing its customs and its beans with it. The merchant packs up his ledger. He has made his deal, but the army is marching. The next chapter of this story doesn't happen in the comfortable, carpeted rooms of Istanbul. It happens in the mud and blood of a battlefield in Central Europe. The bean is going to war. It's going to be packed into sacks, loaded onto camels, and marched all the way to the gates of Vienna. You finish your cup, leave a coin for the kvechi, and step out into the bustling street. The sun is setting on the Golden Horn. You are leaving the center of the world and heading to the frontier. Grab your coat, it's going to get cold. We are heading to 1683, and the siege is about to begin. You are standing in the mud outside the massive star-shaped fortifications of Vienna. The year is 1683. The air smells of gunpowder, unwashed bodies, and the distinct metallic temps of blood. You are in the camp of the Ottoman Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha. This is the second time the Ottomans have tried to crack this nut, and it is the high-water mark of their advance into Europe. The siege has been grinding on for 2 months. Inside the city, the Viennese are starving, eating cats and rats. Outside, the Ottoman army is a sprawling city of tents, thousands of them, stretching as far as the eye can see. It is a display of imperial power that is terrifying to behold. But you aren't looking at the cannons. You are looking at the logistics. Among the ammunition, the tents, and the weaponry, the Ottoman army has brought something essential for morale. 500 sacks of strange green beans. Kara Mustafa is confident. He has the city surrounded. He sits in his opulent silk tent, sipping his dark, bitter coffee, plotting the final assault. To him, coffee is a civilized necessity, a reminder of home in a barbaric land. It fuels his generals during the long nights of strategy. It is the battery acid of the war machine. But then, history pivots. On September 12th, the relief army arrives. The Polish king Jan Sobieski, leads the largest cavalry charge in history, the winged hussars down the Kahlenberg Hill. It is a scene of cinematic chaos. The ground shakes as thousands of heavy horses smash into the Ottoman lines. The siege is broken. Panic ensues. The disciplined Ottoman retreat turns into a rout. You watch as the vizier's army flees, leaving everything behind. Cannons, tents, parrots, monkeys, yes, they brought pets and those 500 sacks of beans. The victorious soldiers loot the camp. They grab the gold, the silk, the weapons. They come across the sacks of beans and are baffled. They smell them. They taste them raw. They are hard and bitter. The soldiers assume it must be camel feed. They are about to burn the sacks or dump them in the Danube when a man steps forward. This is a mainstream historical fact. The man is Jerzy Franciszek Kolczycki or Georg Franz Kolczycki, depending on who you ask. He is a Polish officer, a spy, and a man who has spent time in Ottoman captivity. He speaks the language, he knows the culture, and most importantly, he knows exactly what those beans are. You watch Kolczycki intervene. He stops the soldiers from destroying the camel feed. He asks for the sacks as his reward for his service during the siege, specifically for a daring mission where he snuck through the Ottoman lines to get a message to the relief army. The commanders, thinking he is asking for trash, happily grant his request. "Sure, Jerzy," they probably say. "Take the weird beans, weirdo." Kolczycki takes his prize and opens the first coffee house in Vienna, the Blue Bottle. But here's the problem. The Viennese hate the drink. You sit in his early shop, watching the locals take a sip of the thick, black, gritty sludge that the Ottomans loved. They gag. To the European palate, accustomed to beer and wine, this tastes like liquid charcoal. It is too bitter, too strong, and frankly, too Turkish. So Kolczycki innovates. He does something the Ottomans never did. You watch him in the back of the shop, experimenting. He filters the coffee to remove the grounds. He adds a spoonful of honey, and then the game changer. He adds milk. You are witnessing the invention of the cappuccino, or at least its great-grandfather. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The name cappuccino comes from the Capuchin friars, whose brown robes matched the color of this new milk-infused coffee. It was a cheeky nod to the Catholic order, blending the sacred with the caffeinated. Suddenly, the drink is palpable. The milk softens the bitterness. The honey makes it a treat. The Viennese, who have a legendary sweet tooth, are hooked. The coffeehouse culture of Vienna is born not from a love of the bean itself, but from a successful remix of the recipe. Historians still argue whether Kolczycki was truly the first to open a coffee house in Vienna. Some records suggest an Armenian merchant named Johannes Diodato beat him to it by a year or so. But Kolczycki had the better PR story. The hero of the siege, the spy who saved the city. Serving you a cup of the enemy's drink, tamed and sweetened for your pleasure. It's a marketing masterclass. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the post-siege hygiene. The city is filled with corpses, dysentery is rampant, and the water quality is questionable at best. But the boiling water for the coffee probably saved a few lives, inadvertently killing the bacteria that the beer brewing process also handled. You sit in the Blue Bottle watching the transformation. The Viennese coffee house begins to develop its own distinct character. It is different from the Ottoman model. It is quieter, more formal. People read newspapers on wooden sticks, a tradition that survives today. They eat pastries, specifically the kipferl, a crescent-shaped roll that legend says was baked to celebrate the defeat of the Ottoman crescent moon. Yes, you are eating the croissant's ancestor. And yes, it is a pastry made of spite. The bean has successfully invaded Europe. It didn't enter through trade agreements or cultural exchange. It entered as the spoils of war. It was left behind in the mud, rescued by a spy, and diluted with milk to suit the local palate. But there is still a major hurdle. The church. You travel south now, crossing the Alps, leaving the newly caffeinated Vienna behind. You are heading to the heart of Christendom, Rome. The priests there are hearing rumors of this Muslim drink. They are worried. If the infidels drink it to fuel their prayers, surely it must be a tool of the devil. The fate of coffee in Europe hangs in the balance. It needs a blessing. It needs a rebrand. It needs the Pope. You arrive in the Vatican. Around the year 1600, we're backtracking slightly in time to catch the parallel development. But the narrative flow demands we settle the religious question before we hit London. You are standing in the presence of Pope Clement VIII. His advisors are whispering in his ear, urging him to ban the bitter invention of Satan. You watch as the cup is brought in. The Pope looks at the dark liquid. The tension in the room is palpable. If he condemns it, coffee becomes an illicit drug, relegated to the black market. If he blesses it, it conquers the world. He lifts the cup, he takes a sip. You hold your breath. You are standing in the ornate, frescoed halls of the Vatican. The year is roughly 1600. The air is cool, smelling of frankincense and old stone. Pope Clement VIII sits on his throne, a man burdened by the weight of spiritual leadership and, presumably, a lot of heavy velvet. Before him stands a nervous aide holding a silver tray. On that tray sits a steaming cup of the controversial black broth. The tension is thick enough to cut with a liturgical knife. The advisors around the Pope are practically vibrating with anxiety. To them, this drink is the wine of Islam. It was used by the Ottomans, the great enemy of Christendom, to fuel their religious fervor. Therefore, by transitive property, drinking it might just turn you into a heretic, or at least make you sympathetic to the Sultan. They are urging the pontiff to ban it, to cast it into the outer darkness, along with usury and premarital handholding. You watch as Clement VIII reaches out. His hand is steady. He is a pragmatic man, curious rather than fearful. He lifts the cup to his lips. The aroma of roasted beans wafts through the papal chamber, a stark contrast to the usual incense. He takes a sip. The room goes silent. You can hear a pin drop or perhaps a rosary bead click. The Pope pauses. He smacks his lips, savoring the bitterness, the sudden clarity, the jolt of energy that hits the brainstem. A smile creeps across his face. This Satan's drink is so delicious, he reportedly declares that it would be a pity to let the infidels have exclusive use of it. This is a mainstream historical fact, or at least the most persistent legend in coffee history. With a wave of his hand, Clement VIII decides to baptize the drink. He effectively cheats the devil. By blessing the bean, he strips it of its heathen status and makes it a Christian beverage. It is a theological loophole of the highest order. If we drink it, it's ours. You exhale, the ban is averted. The floodgates are open. Because of this moment, coffee is now kosher, or rather hallowed turnally, for the European masses. It's no longer a suspicious drug, it's a sanctioned stimulant. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Europe is on the brink of the Enlightenment. It is waking up from the long, boozy hangover of the Middle Ages. Let's do a quick reality check on what Europe was drinking before this. Water was dangerous. It was often full of pathogens that would turn your insides into a slip and slide. So, people drank weak beer or watered-down wine for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. You are walking through a society that is perpetually, mildly buzzed. The average European was operating with a blood alcohol content that would get you fired from operating a forklift today. Coffee changes the chemical baseline of the continent. You watch as the great sobering begins. People switch from a depressant alcohol to a stimulant, caffeine. Instead of waking up with a headache and a fog, they're waking up with a buzz and an idea. Here's a quirky tidbit. Before coffee took hold, breakfast in Europe often consisted of beer. Soup, literally warm beer, thickened with bread and eggs. Imagine eating that and then trying to invent calculus. It's a miracle anything got done. Coffee replaced this sludge with a drink that sharpened the mind. It's not a coincidence that the age of reason follows the arrival of the bean. Historians still argue whether Clement VIII actually said those exact words, or if the baptism story was apocryphal PR created by Venetian merchants to sell more beans, but the effect was real. By the mid-17th century, coffee was flowing into Venice, then up to France, and eventually across the Channel to England. You follow the bean north. You leave the marble halls of Rome and travel to the foggy, muddy streets of London. The year is 1652. The English Civil War has just ended. The king has lost his head. The Puritans are in charge. It's a grim, serious time. But in a small alleyway off Cornhill, a man named Pasqua Rossi is setting up a stall. He is a Greek servant who was brought to London by an English merchant. He is about to introduce the English to the black grit. You stand in the drizzle, watching the first Londoners approach the stall. They are skeptical. The flyer Rosie hands out claims the drink cures everything from dropsy to scurvy to wind in the guts. It is marketed as a miracle drug. You buy a cup, it costs a penny. You take a sip. It's awful burnt, unfiltered, and gritty. But then the buzz hits. You look around. Other men are drinking it. They aren't stumbling or slurring like they do at the alehouse. They are talking. They are arguing about politics, about trade, about science. You are witnessing the birth of the penny university. This is the nickname given to the English coffee houses. For the price of a penny for the coffee, you gained admission to a room where you could listen to the smartest men in the city debate. You didn't need tuition. You just needed a coin and a bladder capable of holding a lot of liquid. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the atmosphere. The London coffee houses were filled with tobacco smoke, so thick you could chew it. The hygiene was appalling. The cups were often shared. The facilities were a bucket in the corner. And the conversation, it was aggressive. If you said something stupid, you were mocked mercilessly. It was Twitter without the block button. As you stand there sipping your penny cup, you realize that the coffee house is doing something different here than it did in Istanbul. In Istanbul, it was about social mixing and storytelling. In London, it is about business. The English are a nation of shopkeepers, as Napoleon would later say, and these shopkeepers need a place to shop. The coffee house is evolving again. It is becoming specialized. The physicians go to one house, the poets go to another, the stock jobbers go to Jonathan's, and the ship captains. The ship captains are heading down toward the river to a place on Tower Street. You finish your drink and pull your collar up against the London fog. You are heading toward the docks. You can smell the River Thames, a mix of salt, tar, and sewage. You are looking for a specific establishment run by a man named Edward Lloyd. He doesn't know it yet, but he's not just running a coffee shop, he's building the insurance industry. The Penny University is about to graduate into the billion-dollar boardroom. Let's go meet Edward. You walk down St. Michael's Alley in Cornhill, pushing through the thick London fog that smells of coal smoke and wet wool. The year is roughly 1660. The city is recovering from the trauma of civil war and the rule of the Puritans. But inside the building you are approaching, the mood is anything but dur. You hear the roar of conversation before you even open the door. You pay your penny at the entrance's small copper coin that grants you access to the most democratic space in England. You step inside. The room is long, low-ceilinged, and hazy with the smoke of clay pipes. The floor is covered in sawdust to soak up the spills and the spit. The walls are plastered with handbills, advertisements for quack medicines, lost dogs, and runaway apprentices. Welcome to the Penny University. You find a spot at a long wooden table. You are squeezed in between a velvet-clad aristocrat and a dusty chimney sweep. This is the defining feature of the London coffee house: social leveling. In the outside world, class is everything. You bow to your betters. You ignore your inferiors. But here, the rules of etiquette are suspended. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Rules and Orders of the Coffee House, published in 1674, explicitly stated that gentry, tradesmen, all are welcome hither, and may without affront sit down together. It was a radical concept. If a lord sat next to a fishmonger, the lord couldn't demand the fishmonger move. And if the fishmonger had a better argument about the latest parliamentary bill, the lord had to listen. You order a dish of coffee. That's what they call it, Heredish. It comes in a deep, saucer-like bowl. It's black, bitter, and piping hot. You take a sip and look around. The room is an information processor. To your left, a group of men are discussing the latest scientific discovery. Is it true that blood circulates? They are drawing diagrams on the table with their fingers. To your right, a merchant is complaining about the price of nutmeg. Across the room, a pamphleteer is reading his latest screed against the government aloud, gauging the reaction of the crowd before he prints it. You are sitting in the analog version of the internet. The coffee house is the server. The patrons are the nodes. The coffee is the electricity keeping the system running. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Because the coffee was so bitter and often adulterated with chicory or burnt crusts, customers began asking for sugar and milk, but the service was slow. Legend has it that a collection box was placed on the counter with the inscription to ensure promptness. The initials TIP. While linguists argue this is a backronym, and tip actually comes from rogue slang. It's a perfect story for the coffee house, a place where speed and efficiency were becoming commodities. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the politics. The discussions here weren't polite debates, they were verbal brawls. The virtuosi, the self-proclaimed intellectuals, would tear you apart if your logic was flawed. You had to be sharp, you had to be informed. If you walked in and asked, "So, who is the king again?" you'd be laughed out of the building. The coffee house was also a mailroom. You notice a rack of letters behind the counter. In a city with no reliable postal service for the common man, you used your favorite coffee house as your address. "Write to me, care of the Turk's Head," you'd say. This meant you had to go there every day to check your mail. And while you were there, you bought a coffee. And you talked. It was a brilliant customer retention strategy. You watch a runner burst through the door. He's out of breath. He shouts out a headline. The Dutch fleet has been spotted off the coast. The room erupts. Half the men stand up. Some run out to sell stocks. Others run out to buy supplies. The information has hit the network. This immediacy is what makes the coffee house dangerous to the status quo. King Charles II, who loved a good party but hated a bad rumor, actually tried to ban coffee houses in 1675. He issued a proclamation for the suppression of coffee houses, claiming they were places where divers, false, malicious, and scandalous reports are devised and spread abroad. You can imagine the reaction. You are sitting there when the news of the ban hits. The room doesn't panic, it gets angry. The outcry is so massive, so immediate, that the king backs down within weeks. It is perhaps the first time in English history that the consumer defeated the crown. The people chose their caffeine over their king's comfort. As the evening wears on, the candles are lit, the smoke gets thicker. You realize that this specific coffee house is a generalist hub. It's a bit of everything. But as London grows, the network needs to segment. The signal-to-noise ratio is getting too low. If you are a doctor, you don't want to hear about wool prices. If you are a poet, you don't want to hear about the dissection of a frog. So, the migration begins. The physicians start gathering at Batson's, the clergy go to Truby's, the writers and wits head to Will's and Covent Garden to roast each other, and the moneymen, they are drifting toward Exchange Alley. But there is one group that needs the most up-to-date, reliable information of all. The men who bet on ships, the men who risk their fortunes on the unpredictable moods of the ocean. They need to know about storms, pirates, and wars before anyone else. You finish your dish, wiping the grit from your lip. You leave the noisy, democratic chaos of the general coffee house. You are heading east toward the smell of tar and the sound of seagulls. You are going to a place where the conversation isn't about philosophy or poetry. It's about risk. You are going to meet the men who are about to turn this caffeine habit into a global financial empire. But first, you need to understand how information travels in a city without telephones. You are about to see the human fiber optic cable. You step out of the warm, smoky embrace of the coffee house and into the bustling chaos of the London streets. It's mid-morning, and the city is a hive of activity. But look closer. Amidst the carriages and the pedestrians, you see young men sprinting. They're dodging carts, leaping over puddles, weaving through the crowds with a singular focus. These are the data packets of the 17th century. They are runners, apprentices, and messengers, physically carrying information from the docks to the city center. In a world without fiber optics or 5G, the speed of information is limited by the speed of a pair of legs. You are witnessing the sneaker net in its original form. The distance between the Port of London where the ship's dockhand, the Royal Exchange where the deals are made is about a mile. That mile is the most valuable stretch of pavement in the world. If a ship arrives from the East Indies carrying a hold full of pepper, the price of pepper in the city will crash as soon as the news breaks. But if you know the ship has arrived 10 minutes before your competitor, you can sell your stock at the high price before the market corrects. That 10-minute window is worth a fortune. You follow one of these runners. He is a scrawny lad, elbows out, eyes wide. He bursts into a coffee house near the exchange. The Golden Fleece is docked. She's heavy in the water. He shouts. Chaos ensues. Men jump up from their tables. Deals are struck in seconds. The runner gets a coin for his trouble, and the market shifts. This is a mainstream historical fact. The coffee houses became the de facto news terminals of London, but the quality of the news was inconsistent. Fake news wasn't invented in 2016. In 1680, a runner might burst in and shout that the French king is dead, causing the market to rally, only for everyone to find out an hour later that he just had a bad cold. Market manipulation was rampant. Speculators would hire runners to spread false rumors just to drive prices down so they could buy cheap. The coffee house was a wild west of information. You needed a filter. You needed a source you could trust. This is where the information exchange begins to professionalize. You walk toward a specific cluster of coffee houses in the alleys around the Royal Exchange, Jonathan's, Garraway's, and others. Here, The walls aren't just covered in ads for lost dogs. They are covered in lists, shipping lists, commodity prices, exchange rates. The coffeehouse owners, the coffeemen, realize that their product isn't just a liquid in the cup, it's the data on the walls. To keep their customers, they start curating the news. They subscribe to foreign gazettes. They pay captains for reliable updates. They ban the known liars. You enter Garraway's. It's famous for being the first place in England to sell tea. But today, the crowd is here for the auction. A candle is burning on the table. We'll get to that later. The men here aren't discussing poetry. They are discussing the yield of the sugar harvest in Jamaica. Here, as a quirky tidbit for you, the layout of these financial coffee houses was designed to facilitate breaking news. There was often a pulpit or a raised desk where the coffeeman or a designated reader would stand. When important news arrived, he would ring a bell or hammer the desk. The room would go silent a rare feat, and the news would be read aloud. It was the push notification of the era. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the anxiety. The men here are leveraged to the hilt. They are betting money they don't have on ships they can't see. Every time the door opens, hearts stop. Is it good news? Is it a shipwreck? Is it a war? The stress levels are off the charts. Ulcers are likely being invented in real time right here. You watch a man in the corner. He's quiet, taking notes. He's comparing the price of coffee in Amsterdam from a Dutch newspaper with the price in London. He notices a discrepancy. He buys in London to sell in Amsterdam. He is performing arbitrage. He is using the information gap to make a profit. This environment breeds a new type of person, the broker. These men don't own the ships or the goods. They own the relationships. They connect the seller to the buyer. And where do they work? They work here. Their office is table 4 at Jonathan's. Their business hours are whenever the coffee house is open. You realize that the coffee house has become a self-regulating organism. The school of the wise has become the school of the wealthy. But there is still too much noise. The generalist coffee houses are too chaotic for the specialized needs of the maritime trade. If you own a ship, you don't care about the price of tea in China. Well, you do, but only if your ship is carrying it. You care about the wind. You care about the tides. You care about which pirate is currently active off the coast of Madagascar. You need a specialist. You leave the frenzy of Exchange Alley and head south again, toward the river. The air gets saltier, the accents get rougher. You are leaving the bankers and entering the world of the sailors. You are looking for a man who decided that, instead of trying to be everything to everyone, he would be everything to just one group of people. You are walking down Tower Street. You are looking for a sign, and there it is, creaking in the wind. Edward Lloyd's Coffee House. It doesn't look like much from the outside, just another shopfront. But inside, the modern world is being constructed, one cup at a time. You push open the heavy wooden door of Edward Lloyd's Coffee House on Tower Street. The year is roughly 1688. Immediately, you are hit with a sensory profile that is distinctly different from the polite, aristocratic buzz of the West End or the frantic desperation of Exchange Alley. This place smells like the world. Underneath the standard heavy blanket of tobacco smoke and roasting coffee, there are notes of tar, damp canvas, hemp rope, and the briny funk of the Thames, which is just a few blocks away. The floorboards here creak under the weight of heavy sea boots, not the delicate slippers of courtiers. You have walked into the unofficial headquarters of the British Merchant Navy. You find a corner to stand in. Sitting is a luxury right now because the place is packed. Look at the clientele. These men have windburn on their faces. Their hands are calloused. They speak in a jargon that would be unintelligible to a landlubber. Talk of dead reckoning, larboard tacks, and trade winds. This is Edward Lloyd's genius. He isn't trying to attract everyone. He is capitalizing on a specific niche. He set up shop right next to the Navy office and the custom house. If you are a ship's captain who just docked, this is the first place you come to get a warm drink and find out what happened while you were at sea for 6 months. If you are a merchant looking to charter a ship, this is where you come to find a captain who isn't a drunkard or a pirate. You spot the man himself, Edward Lloyd, moving through the crowd. He's not a financial genius. He's not an actuary. He's a caffeeman, a hospitality pro. He's wiping down tables, topping off cups, and, most importantly, listening. This is a mainstream historical fact. Edward Lloyd didn't invent insurance. He didn't underwrite ships. He didn't even have a background in finance. He simply provided the venue. He created a sticky environment warm wellet and stocked with pens, ink, and paperware The people who did do those things felt comfortable hanging out for hours. He was the WeWork community manager of the 17th century. You watch Lloyd work the room. A merchant asks him, "Edward, has the Mary Rose been sighted?" Lloyd doesn't just shrug. He knows, or he knows who knows. He points the merchant toward a captain in the corner who just arrived from Lisbon. Lloyd is the human index of the room. He connects the nodes. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The waiters in these establishments, including Lloyd's, were often nicknamed kidneys. No one is entirely sure why, maybe because they were essential organs of the operation, or perhaps it was just weird 17th century slang for someone who moved quickly. But these kidneys were legendary. They could memorize complex orders, deliver messages across a crowded room without spilling a drop, and maintain a discretion that would put a modern Swiss banker to shame. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the social dynamics here. This is a high-trust, high-stakes environment. If you walked in and pretended to be a captain, you'd be exposed in minutes. These men know every ship, every route, and every sandbar from Bristol to Bombay. You are standing in a room of experts. Imposters are sniffed out faster than a bad batch of beans. You order a coffee. It's served black, strong, and functional. This isn't a place for leisurely sipping and discussing poetry. This is fuel. The men here are working. You see a group huddled over a table looking at a map. They are plotting a course to the West Indies. They are calculating the risk of Spanish privateers. They are discussing the price of sugar futures. Historians still argue about whether Lloyd's success was due to his location or his personality. Plenty of other coffee houses were near the docks, but Lloyd went the extra mile. He realized that his customers craved information more than caffeine, so he started curating it. He established a network of runners, like the ones we saw earlier, who would bring him news from the waterfront before it hit the official gazettes. You see a pulpit in the main room, a raised desk where announcements are made. When a runner arrives, Lloyd or a kidney climbs the pulpit. The room quiets down, a hush falling over the sea captains. The Black Pearl has arrived safely in Plymouth. A cheer goes up from one table, a groan from another, presumably from someone who bet against it or sold their cargo too early. The pulpit creates a focal point. It turns the coffee house into a theater of commerce. You realize that Lloyd has created a platform business. He doesn't own the content, the ship's cargo. He just owns the interface, the room. And, like any good platform, he monetizes the traffic. He sells the coffee, sure, but the real value is the network effect. The more captains who come here, the more merchants have to come here to find them, which brings more captains. It's a flywheel. The atmosphere here is thick with the concept of risk. In the other coffee houses, risk is abstract political theory or theological debates. Here, risk is physical. It is wood rotting in salt water. It is scurvy. It is cannons firing. The men in this room are gambling with their lives and their fortunes against the most powerful force on Earth, the ocean. You watch a transaction happening at the next table. A merchant needs to sell a cargo of timber that is currently sitting on a ship in the Baltic. He doesn't want to wait for the ship to arrive. He wants the cash now. He needs to auction the cargo afloat. But how do you hold an auction in a noisy, smoky coffee house without a gavel and without endless shouting? You watch as a waiter brings out a small object. It's not a hammer, it's a candle, a simple tallow candle. He places it on the table. He lights it. The room goes quiet. The men crowd around. You are about to witness one of the most stressful, high-pressure sales techniques ever invented. It's a game of chicken played with fire. The kidney takes a pin. He pushes it into the side of the candle, about an inch down from the flame. The bidding for the cargo of the Good Intent is now open, Lloyd announces from the pulpit. Bids will be accepted until the candle burns down to the pin. Your heart starts to race. You are staring at the flame. It's flickering in the drafty room. The wax is melting. The pin is holding, but for how long? Welcome to the candle auction. You are staring at the flame. It is a small, dancing tongue of fire in a room thick with smoke and ambition. The rest of the world has fallen away. The noise of the street, the rattle of carriages, the distant shouts of the Thames water minute all fades into a hum. All that matters right now is that tallow candle and the tiny metal pin stuck into its side. The atmosphere in Lloyd's has shifted from a dull roar to a razor-sharp tension. This is selling by the inch of a candle, and it is the most adrenaline-pumping spectator sport in London. Here is how it works. A ship, or perhaps a cargo of French wine captured by a privateer, is up for grabs. The auctioneer of Fawn, a loud-voiced man standing on a box or a table, announces the lot. But instead of banging a gavel to end the bidding at his own discretion, he lights the candle. The pin is inserted about an inch down the shaft. As long as the pin stays in the wax, the bidding is open. The moment the heat melts the tallow enough for the pin to lose its grip and falk link into the metal tray below, the auction is dead. The last person to shout a bid before the sound of the pin hitting the tray is the winner. It is a mechanism of pure psychological torture. Watch the wax begin to pool around the wick. At first, the bidding is casual. A merchant in a velvet coat throws out a lowball number, 200 pounds. Another man, nursing a dish of coffee, counters 210. They are testing the waters. The pin is still firm. There is plenty of time. But time in a candle auction is subjective. It depends on the draft from the door. It depends on the quality of the tallow. It depends on whether someone breathes too hard near the flame. You are watching a biological timer that is completely unpredictable. As the flame eats its way down, the wax starts to drip. The pool widens. The pin begins to tilt. Suddenly, the room explodes. The casual bidders drop out, and the serious players lean in. They are shouting now, their voices overlapping. 300, 320, 350. They aren't looking at the auctioneer. They are staring at the pin with the intensity of a cat watching a mouse hole. This is a mainstream historical fact. Inch of candle auctions were the standard way to sell ex-naval ships, confiscated contraband, and perishable cargoes in the 17th and 18th centuries. The logic was simple. It prevented the auction from dragging on forever, and it prevented the auctioneer from playing favorites by hammering down too early or too late. The candle was an impartial, if somewhat chaotic, judge. You feel the sweat pricking at your hairline. The pin is hanging by a thread of semi-solid goop. It's defying gravity. The shouting becomes a frantic stick. Men are trying to time their bids to be the very last syllable spoken before the drop. It's a sniper battle of vocal cords. 400, screams a man with a red face. 410, yells his rival. The flame flickers. The wax gives way. Ping. But it cuts through the shouting like a cannon shot. Silence slams back into the room. The man who said 410 freezes. He has won. Or has he? Arguments erupt immediately. I spoke before it fell. No, the pin was already in the air. This is where Edward Lloyd or his trusty waiters step in as referees. The coffee house isn't just the venue, it's the court of appeals. The collective memory of the room decides. He got it in, a neutral captain grunts. The verdict is accepted. The deal is done. Here, as a quirky tidbit for you, this method of auctioneering was so effective at inducing panic buying that it did unjust apply to ships. It was used for land, timber, and even church pews. In some rural English parishes, they used this method to lease out grazing rights well into the 20th century. It turns out, nothing motivates a human being to spend money quite like watching a candle melt. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the financial violence of this moment. If you sneezed at the wrong time, you might accidentally bid on a leaky brigantine with a cargo of rotting nutmeg. Or worse, you might get caught up in the winner, S-curse. The adrenaline makes you bid way more than the ship is worth, just so you can beat the guy with the stupid hat across the table. You walk away victorious, only to realize you've just bankrupted your family for a pile of wet wood. Historians still argue whether the candle auction originated as a secular version of a religious ritual. Some scholars point to the practice of excommunication. By candleware, the grace of God was removed when the candle was extinguished, as the grim inspiration for this deadly Nedravin commerce. It adds a layer of theological dread to the whole affair. When the light goes out, your chance at salvation, or a bargain, is gone. You watch the winner sign the ledger. He looks exhausted. He needs a drink, something stronger than coffee, but he stays. Why? Because in this room, information is continuous. The auction is over, but the news never stops. Edward Lloyd is watching all of this from his pulpit. He sees the price the ship sold for. He sees who bought it. He sees who has cash and who is bluffing. He is collecting data points. The auction has cleared the air, but it has also generated a lot of paperwork. In a pre-digital world, keeping track of who bought what, which ships are leaving, and which ones are overdue is a logistical nightmare. The rumors are flying too fast. I heard the Susan went down off Brest. No, she was sighted in Lisbon. Lloyd realizes that the chaos of the candle auction needs a counterbalance. It needs order. It needs a single source of truth. The rumors are good for business. They keep people drinking coffee, but facts. Facts are a premium product. You see Lloyd pick up a quill. He pulls a sheet of paper toward him. He isn't just recording the tab for the coffee. He is starting to write down the movements of the ships. He is compiling the intelligence that his runners have brought him, filtering out the lies and distilling it into a legible format. He is about to create the oldest continuously published newspaper in the world, sort of. He is about to turn the gossip of the coffee house into a database. You lean over his shoulder to see what he's writing. It's a list, just a simple list of names, dates, and ports. But to the men in this room, this list is more valuable than the Bible. Welcome to the birth of Lloyd's List. You are standing behind the high wooden pulpit where Edward Lloyd holds court. The chaos of the candle auction has subsided, replaced by the low, rhythmic murmur of 100 separate conversations. The air is blue with smoke, but down here at desk level, the focus is on ink and paper. You watch Lloyd's hand move across a sheet of parchment. He isn't writing poetry. He isn't writing a diary. He is writing the most boring, dry, and financially critical sentences in the English language. Arrived at Gravesend, the Golden Hind, spoken with off Lizard Point, the Antelope, wind, southwest fair. This is the birth of Lloyd's List. It seems mundane to Ubicycli, a handwritten Excel spreadsheet from 1696, but to the men in this room, this is a revelation. Before this moment, shipping news was a game of telephone. A sailor told a barmaid who told a merchant, who told his brother, who told you. By the time the information reached your ears, the ship had changed names, the cargo had doubled, and the captain had been eaten by a kraken. Lloyd is fixing the glitch. He is taking the raw, chaotic data brought in by his runners, those sweaty kids we saw sprinting from the docks, and he is filtering it. He is verifying it, and most importantly, he is publishing it. This is a mainstream historical fact. In 1696, Edward Lloyd launched Lloyd's News, a printed sheet that appeared 3 times a week. It was one of the earliest examples of specialized business journalism. It didn't contain gossip about the king's mistresses or reviews of the latest plays. It contained cold, hard data about maritime logistics. You watch a waiter a kidney take the fresh sheet from Lloyd's desk and pin it to a board on the wall. The reaction is immediate. A swarm of merchants descends on the board. They aren't reading for pleasure. They are reading for profit. If the list says a ship has arrived safely, the insurance premiums on its next voyage drop. If the list says a ship is overdue, the panic sets in. Lloyd has created the source of truth. In this coffee house, if it isn't on the list, it didn't happen. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Lloyd's dedication to accuracy was so intense that he inadvertently got himself cancelled by the government. In one issue of Lloyd's News, he printed a seemingly harmless report about the House of Lords petitioning the king to remove a tax on coasters, coastal trading vessels. The House of Lords, which was apparently very sensitive about its PR, took offense to the wording. They summoned Lloyd, yelled at him, and demanded he issue a correction. Lloyd, being a stubborn coffee man, essentially said, "No thanks," and simply stopped printing the newspaper for years. He went back to handwritten notes. Rather than bow to censorship, it was the 17th century equivalent of deleting your Twitter account in protest. You look at the list again. It's not just ship names. It lists the captains. This is a crucial piece of data. In the 1600s, the competence of the captain was a major risk factor. Is Captain Smith a drunk? Does Captain Jones have a history of accidentally running aground and selling the cargo out the back door? By publicly linking the captain to the ship's performance, Lloyd is creating a reputation economy. If you wreck your ship, it goes on the list. Everyone sees it. You can't just move to the next town and lie about your resume. The list remembers. Historians still argue about how much of this was Lloyd's genius and how much was just him trying to save his breath. Some suggest that he started the list simply because he was tired of answering the same question as the Mary arrived. 500 times a day, by writing it down and pinning it up, he was essentially creating a fact page so he could get back to selling coffee. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the boredom of reading this thing. There are no pictures, no jokes, no clickbait headlines like you won't believe what this captain found in the Caribbean. It is pure, unadulterated logistics. Reading it feels like studying a train timetable for a country you don't live in. But for the men in this room, this dull list is the difference between a mansion in the country and a debtor's prison in Fleet Street. You realize that Lloyd is doing something profound here. He is standardizing time and space. Before the list, a ship was out there in the void. Now, it is tracked. It has a status. He is shrinking the world. He is turning the terrifying unknown ocean into a manageable set of coordinates. As you watch the merchants scribbling notes from the board into their own pocketbooks, you see the shift in their behavior. They are calmer. When you have data, you have less anxiety. You can calculate, you can plan. And once you can calculate, you can start doing something much more interesting than just trading goods. You can start trading risk. If you know, based on Lloyd's data, that only 1 in 20 ships sinks on the route to Jamaica, you can start making bets. You can say to a worried ship owner, "I bet you this money that your ship won't sink." If it sinks, you pay him. If it doesn't, you keep the money. Wait, that sounds like gambling. Do you look around the room? Men are exchanging slips of paper. Money is changing hands, but no goods are moving. They aren't buying sugar or spice. They are buying the possibility of disaster. Lloyd's list has provided the actuarial table. Now the gamblers are moving in, but they don't call themselves gamblers. They are about to invent a fancy new name for themselves to make it sound respectable. You leave the cluster of men at the notice board and move toward a table in the back, where the smoke is thickest and the voices are lowest. The men here aren't looking at the list to see if their cargo arrived. They are looking at the list to see if they won their bet. We are about to step onto the slippery slope between a casino and an insurance brokerage. And in 17th century London, that line is practically invisible. Get your wallet ready, or maybe hide it. We're about to meet the betting man. You slide onto a bench at the back of the room, away from the notice board and the pulpit. The air here is different. It's quieter, but heavier. The men at this table aren't shouting about cargo prices. They are huddled over small slips of paper, speaking in low, rapid tones. You look at their eyes. They have the same dilated pupils you saw on the goat herder in Ethiopia. But it's not just the caffeine anymore. It's the dopamine. You are sitting in the middle of a casino that is pretending to be a financial institution. Let's be honest about what is happening here. In the late 1600s, the distinction between insuring a ship and betting on a horse is practically non-existent. The concept of insurance as a boring, responsible safety net doesn't exist yet. Right now, it is a high-stakes wager between two gentlemen. Here is the deal. A ship owner, let's call him, Captain Anxiety, comes to this table. He is terrified that his ship, the Bountiful, will sink on its way to Barbados. He can't afford to lose the ship and the cargo. So, he finds a wealthy man at the coffee house. Let's call him Mr. Deep Pockets. Captain Anxiety says, "I bet you £50 that my ship won't sink." Mr. Deep Pockets says, "I'll take that bet." But the odds are 20 to 1. So, Captain Anxiety pays Mr. Deep Pockets a premium. If the ship arrives safely, Deep Pockets keeps the cash. Easy money. But if the ship hits a reef and goes down, Deep Pockets has to pay out the full value of the hull to Captain Anxiety. To the modern eye, this is an insurance policy. To the 17th century eye, this is just a sophisticated way of playing roulette with boats. You watch a transaction unfold. A man in a velvet coat is taking a line on a ship called the Tiger. He's calculating the odds in his head. It's winter. The North Sea is rough. The pirates are active. He demands a higher premium. The ship owner grimaces but agrees. They shake hands. This brings us to a quirky tidbit. Because there was no regulation, the men at Lloyd's didn't stop at ships. They would insure anything. These were called wager policies. You could buy an insurance policy on whether a specific member of parliament would lose his seat. You could insure against the king dying within the year. There is even a record of a policy taken out on the chastity of a certain French cross-dressing diplomat, the Chevalier d'Eon. People were literally betting on the gender and sexual habits of public figures, but they called it insurance to make it sound professional. It was the golden age of degenerate gambling disguised as commerce. Historians still argue about whether this gambling culture was a bug or a feature of early capitalism. Some scholars claim that without this appetite for risk, without these adrenaline junkies willing to bet their fortunes on a wooden bucket crossing the Atlantic, the British Empire would never have expanded. The gambler provided the capital that the merchant needed to feel safe. It was a symbiotic relationship born of vice. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the financial swings. Imagine betting your house on a ship you've never seen, captained by a guy you met once, sailing through a hurricane you can't track. There is no reinsurance yet. If you lose the bet, you pay out of your own pocket. If you can't pay, you go to debtor's prison. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Just rot in a cell until you die of typhus. You look at the man next to you. He's sweating despite the chill in the room. He has written too much risk. He's overexposed. He's praying for good weather in the Caribbean. You realize that the coffee house has turned weather reports into financial indicators. This blurring of lines led to some dark incentives. If you insured a ship for more than it was worth, a practice called overinsurance, you might secretly hope it sinks. There were whispers of ships being sent out with coffin cruise-doomed vessels meant to go down so the owners could collect the payout from the gamblers at Lloyd's. It's insurance fraud in its infancy, born right here in the smoke. It got so bad that the government eventually had to step in. The Gambling Act of 1774, often called the Life Assurance Act, was passed specifically to stop people from taking out life insurance policies on random celebrities just to profit from their deaths. Parliament essentially had to say, guys, you can't bet on the Prime Minister's death unless you are actually related to him. But in the timeline you are standing in right now, those laws are decades away. It is the Wild West. You watch a young man approach the table. He looks wealthy, perhaps a bit naive. He wants to get in on the action. He sees the older men making money just by signing their names. He thinks it looks easy. I'll take a share of that risk, he says, puffing out his chest. The older veterans exchange a glance. They know something he doesn't. They know about the storm brewing off the Scilly Isles. They happily let him take the bet. You are witnessing the transfer of wealth from the ignorant to the informed, facilitated by the coffeehouse network. This is the dark side of the information exchange. If you are UNT in the inner circle, if you do UNT have the best runners or the closest relationship with Edward Lloyd Jew, are the mark, the coffeehouse is a predator. As you watch the money change hands, you realize that this chaos needs a structure. You can't just have guys shouting bets at each other forever. It's too messy. If a ship sinks, who pays how much? In what order? The system needs a protocol. It needs a physical way to track the liability. You watch the merchant with the tiger policy again. He pulls out a long piece of paper. It lists the ship, the cargo, the destination, and the total value. He places it on the table. The gambler in the velvet coat reads it. He dips his quill in the ink. He doesn't sign a separate contract. He writes his name under the text of the policy, along with the amount he is willing to cover. I, John Smith, take 100 pounds of this risk. Then the next man takes the pen. He writes his name under John Smith's I, Thomas Brown, take 50 pounds. They are writing their names under the wording, you blink. The etymology hits you like a rogue wave. They are underwriting. You are watching the literal invention of the underwriter. It's not a job title yet, it's a physical action. It is the act of signing your name at the bottom of a piece of paper to say, if this goes wrong, I will pay. The coffeehouse is no longer just a place to bet. It is becoming a syndicate. The loose collection of gamblers is starting to form a chain of shared liability. You lean in closer to watch the ink dry. This specific piece of paper is going to travel. It's going to go on the ship. No, it stays here. But the promise it holds travels across the ocean. But there is a problem. These men are betting based on gut feeling, rumors, and experience. That captain looks sturdy, or I have a bad feeling about Tuesdays. That's not a sustainable business model. If you want to turn this gambling habit into a global industry, you need to stop guessing and start calculating. You need math. You look toward the corner of the room where a different kind of man is sitting. He isn't looking at a map. He's looking at a table of numbers. He's holding a slide rule. He is about to bring the cold, hard logic of probability to the emotional chaos of the coffeehouse. The mathematicians are entering the chat, and they are going to ruin all the fun by proving that the house always wins. You watch the quill scratching across the parchment. The sound is scratchy, visceral, like a small animal clawing at the door. The man holding the pen is an aristocrat with a powdered wig that is slightly askew from the humidity of the coffeehouse. He finishes his signature, adds a sum 200 pounds, and passes the paper to the man on his left. You are witnessing the formalization of the huddle. In the previous section, we saw the act of betting. Now, we are seeing the act of structuring. This single piece of paper, passing from hand to hand around the table at Lloyd's, is the grandfather of the modern insurance contract. It is known as the slip. Here is the logic that is changing the world. A ship is too expensive for one man to lose. If you own a ship worth 20,000 pounds and it sinks, you are destitute. You are living in a barrel. But if 20 men agree to share the risk, this is the genius of the coffeehouse underwriting system. It is crowdfunding disaster relief. You watch the document travel. It starts at the top with the details of the voyage. The Good Providence, London to Jamaica, cargo, sugar, and rum. Beneath that text, there is blank space. The first man to sign is crucial. He is the lead. This is a mainstream historical fact. The lead underwriter was the influencer of the 17th century financial world in a room full of sheep. He was the shepherd. If a respected merchant like Sir Francis Baring signed his name at the top of the slip for a significant amount, it signaled to the rest of the room, "I have done the due diligence. I know this captain. I trust this ship." You watch the psychological domino effect. Because the lead signed, the man next to him signs quickly, barely reading the details. Then the next. Then the next. They are following the smart money. Within minutes, the slip is full. The risk is 100% covered. The ship can sail. This social dynamic is unique to the coffeehouse. If these men were in separate offices across London, sending letters back and forth, this process would take weeks. Here, it takes 10 minutes. The caffeine accelerates the consensus, but look closely at the slip itself. There is a mysterious set of initials stamped at the top of many early policies. SG historians still argue about what SG actually stood for. For centuries, people assumed it meant ship and goods, which makes sense, as that's what was being insured. But other scholars argue it stood for the Latin salutis gratia, for the sake of safety, or summa, general total sum. In a typically British twist of bureaucracy, nobody bothered to write down the official definition, so the letters just stayed on the standard Lloyd's policy form until ... wait for it, 1982. For 300 years, bankers signed a document without knowing what the title meant, simply because that's how we've always done it. You lean in to read the names on the list. These aren't faceless corporations, these are people. John, Thomas, William, and this is where the terror sets in. Here is the reality check. You probably wouldn't survive. These men are operating under unlimited liability. In the modern world, if you buy shares in a company and that company goes bankrupt, you lose the money you invested. That's it. You don't lose your car. You don't lose your house. But here, in the 17th century coffeehouse, unlimited liability means exactly what it says. If you sign your name for £500 and the disaster is bigger than expected, say, the ship sinks and it crashes into another ship. And that ship sets fire to a port, you are on the hook for everything. If you can't pay from your bank account, the creditors come for your estate. They take your land, they take your furniture, they take the silver buckles off your shoes. You are betting your entire existence on that signature. You look at the faces of the underwriters, they look calm, almost bored. They are sipping their coffee, joking about the weather, but underneath the wigs, there is a current of steel. They are accepting a level of personal responsibility that would make a modern CEO vomit. This system relies entirely on Uberame Fidei, utmost good faith. This is a legal concept born right here in the smoke. Because the underwriter cannot see the ship, it's in the harbor, and cannot see the cargo, it's in the hold. He has to trust the broker presenting the slip. If the broker lies, if he fails to mention that the ship is actually a rotting bucket of worms, the contract is void. You watch a broker approach a table. He is sweating. He has a slip for a ship that is overdue. The ship should have arrived a week ago. It hasn't. He is trying to get overdue insurance, basically a last-minute bet that the ship is just slow, not sunk. The underwriters smelled the desperation. The premium shoots up. "I'll write it," says a man with a scar on his cheek, "but at 40 guineas %, that's a 40% fee. It's highway robbery." But the broker agrees. He needs the coverage. This specific interaction highlights a quirky tidbit about the culture. The underwriters sat in boxers. Originally, just hubacked wooden booths to keep out the draft and provide some privacy. These boxes became the standard unit of office space in Lloyd's. Even today, in the ultra-modern high-tech Lloyd's building in London, the underwriters still sit at desks called boxers that look weirdly like wooden pews. It's a skeuomorphic design feature carried over from the coffeehouse days. You literally cannot conduct business unless you are sitting in a wooden box. As the slip is filled and returned to the broker, you realize that the coffeehouse has become a machine for turning anxiety into capital. The ship owner sleeps better because he's insured. The underwriter sleeps better, hopefully, because he's collected a premium. The trade routes of the empire expand because the financial risk has been neutralized. But there is a flaw in this system, a big one. These men are betting based on intuition. I feel like this is a good bet. My knee hurts, so a storm is coming. I dreamed of a fish last week. It is a system built on superstition and hearsay. As the volume of trade explodes, gut feeling isn't enough. You can't run a global economy on vibes. You need hard numbers. You need to know mathematically what the chances of a shipwreck actually are. You see a man enter the coffee house who looks out of place. He isn't wearing the rough coat of a captain or the velvet of a merchant. He looks like a nerd. Well, a 17th century nerd. He is carrying a book of mortality tables and a primitive calculator. He is looking at the chaotic betting of the underwriters with a mix of horror and opportunity. He realizes that these men are underpricing the risk. They are guessing, and he can prove it. The coffee house is about to get a lesson in statistics. The gamblers are about to meet the actuaries, and the math is going to change everything. You watch as the nerd we spotted earlier finds a seat. He doesn't slam a tankard down or shout a bid. He carefully clears a space on the sticky table, pushing aside a discarded pipe and a spill of coffee grounds. He opens a book. It isn't a ledger of debts. It is a book of distinct, terrifying logic. You are sitting in the mathematician's corner, while the rest of the coffee house is operating on adrenaline and superstition. This small group of men is operating on something far more powerful, the law of large numbers. To the merchant shouting at the candle auction, the fate of the good intent is a singular, unique event. It will either sink or it won't. It is a binary drama. But to the man sitting next to you, let's call him James, the good intent is just a data point. He doesn't care about the ship. He cares about the fleet. James realizes that while you cannot predict if one specific man will die tomorrow, you can predict with terrifying accuracy how many men out of a group of 1,000 will die this year. The individual is chaos. The aggregate is certainty. This is the birth of actuarial science, and oddly enough, it's being pioneered by the same guys who look at the stars. This is a mainstream historical fact. One of the fathers of insurance mathematics was none other than Edmund Halley. Yes, the comet guy. When he wasn't predicting when a ball of ice would return from deep space, he was analyzing the birth and death records of the city of Breslau. In 1693, he published a paper that essentially created the first robust mortality table. He applied the same math he used for celestial orbits to human lifespans. He realized that death, like a comet, follows a trajectory. You look over James's shoulder at the paper he is studying. It's not a treasure map, it's a bill of mortality. These were weekly sheets published in London, listing every death in the city and the cause. They are grim reading. You see columns for ague, apoplexy, griping in the guts, and the always mysterious found dead in the streets. To the average Londoner, this was just depressing news. To the men in this corner, it was a data set. Here, as a quirky tidbit for you. The causes of death listed in these early bills were often diagnostically hilarious by modern standards. You might see teeth listed as a killer of hundreds likely infections. You might see rising of the lights lung issues, or, my personal favorite, frighted. Yes, officially, you could be scared to death in 17th century London, and the statisticians would log it, categorize it, and calculate the premium for it. You watch as the mathematician takes his quill and does a calculation. He is figuring out the price of an annuity. Before this moment, if you wanted to buy a pension, the price was often the same regardless of your age. A 20-year-old and a 70-year-old paid the same amount. The coffee house gamblers were just guessing. The mathematician realizes this is insanity. The 70-year-old is a terrible bet for the seller. He will die soon. So you pay out less, but a great bet for the buyer. No, wait, it's the other way around for life insurance. For an annuity where the bank pays you until you die, the 70-year-old is cheap because he won't collect for long. The 20-year-old is expensive because he's going to drain the account for 50 years. The math is correcting the market. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the social isolation of this table. The virtuosi of the Royal Society who hung out in coffee houses like the Grecian or Slaughter S were often mocked by the rughantable merchants of Lloyd S. They were seen as Piantheschi dreamers. Who cares about X and Y? The captain asks. I care about pirates and reefs. You are witnessing the friction between gut feeling and big data. The underwriters at Lloyd's are skeptical. They trust their instinct. They trust the look in a captain's eye. They do untrust a formula written by a guy who has never held a rope in his life. Historians still argue about how quickly this math was actually adopted. Some scholars suggest that despite Halley's brilliance, the insurance market remained a gambling den for decades longer, ignoring the science because the profits were already so high. Why bother with complex calculus when you can just charge a fat premium and hope for the best? It wasn't until the sheer volume of losses forced them to professionalize that the actuaries were truly invited to the cool table. You watch a transaction that proves this tension. A merchant approaches the mathematician. He wants to insure a ship. The mathematician asks for the tonnage, the crew size, the route, the season. He consults a table. He gives a price, 12 guineas per cent. The merchant scoffs. Old Tom over there will write it for 10. The mathematician shrugs. Old Tom will be bankrupt in 6 months. And he's right. The math is the immune system of the market. It identifies the bad bets and prices them out of existence. If the risk is too high, the premium becomes unaffordable and the ship doesn't sail. The actuary is silently regulating the safety of the British Empire. As you sit there, surrounded by smoke and numbers, you realize that this is the moment the coffee house stops being a casino and starts being a financial institution. The randomness is being tamed. The inch of candle panic is being replaced by the sliding scale of probability. But there is a danger in numbers. When people start to believe they have solved the market, when they think they have a mathematical formula that guarantees profit, they start to get cocky. They stop looking at the ships and start looking only at the paper. They start to believe that the line on the graph will go up forever. You look around the room. The mood is shifting. The caution of the early days is gone. The math has given them a false sense of invincibility. Everyone is making money. The underwriters are rich. The captains are rich. Even the kidneys are getting good tips. There is a buzz in the air. And it's not just the caffeine. It's mania. You hear a new phrase being whispered at the tables. It's not a ship name, it's a company name, the South Sea Company. The mathematicians think they have accounted for every variable, storms, pirates, plague, but they forgot to put one variable into their equation: human greed. You finish your coffee. It tastes a little sour now. You check your pockets. You should probably secure your wallet, because we are about to walk into the biggest, dumbest, most catastrophic financial party in history. The coffee house built the system. And now, the coffee house is about to burn it down. Welcome to the bubble. You are standing in Exchange Alley, but you can't move. It is the summer of 1720, and the narrow lane between the coffee houses is packed shoulder to shoulder with sweating, shouting, desperate humanity. The polite murmur of the School of the Wise has been replaced by the roar of a riot. You are witnessing the first true financial mania of the modern world. This is the South Sea Bubble. The coffee house has mutated. It is no longer a place to sit and think. It is a place to buy and panic. The air is thick with greed. It smells of unwashed bodies and expensive perfume because everyone is here. Look around. That's a duke rubbing elbows with a chimney sweep. That's a fishmonger screaming at a countess. The barriers of class have been completely dissolved by the universal solvent of easy money. The object of this hysteria is the South Sea Company. On paper, it is a trading firm granted a monopoly to supply enslaved people and goods to the Spanish colonies in South America. In reality, it is a massive state-sponsored Ponzi scheme designed to absorb the national debt. The company hasn't actually done much trading. The Spanish are at war with the British, so the ships aren't sailing. The profits are imaginary. But in the coffee house, reality doesn't matter. Only the narrative matters. And the narrative is, this stock is going to the moon. You squeeze into Garraway's coffee house. It is the epicenter of the blast zone. Men are standing on tables, waving scraps of paper. Buying at 500, selling at 550. The price of a single share has risen from £100 to £1,000 in a matter of months. People are liquidating everything they own: land, jewelry, business, inventory, to buy paper. This is a mainstream historical fact. The mania was so pervasive that it ensnared the smartest man on the planet. Sir Isaac Newton, the guy who figured out gravity and calculus, invested early, made a profit, sold, saw his friends getting richer, got FOMO, fear of missing out, bought back in at the peak, and lost a fortune, roughly £20,000, which is millions in today's money. He famously stated, "I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." You watch the frenzy. The coffeehouse owners are loving it. They are selling coffee, sure, but they are also renting out their tables as makeshift brokerage desks. Every inch of wood is monetized, but the South Sea Company is just the shark. The water is filled with remeras. Because everyone is in a buying mood, scammers have set up shop in the corners of the coffeehouses to sell stock in, well, anything. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. These were known as the bubble companies. In the fever of 1720, you could buy stock in a company formed for importing walnut trees from Virginia. You could invest in a venture to build a wheel for perpetual motion. There was even a subscription book opened at a coffeehouse for a company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. The promoter opened the shop at 9 a.m., collected £2,000 in deposits of fortune by 2 p.m., and then locked the door and fled the country before dinner. You are seeing the dark side of the decentralized network. The coffeehouse is an incredibly efficient machine for spreading information, but it has no filter for truth. If a guy in a nice coat stands on a chair at Jonathan's and says, "I found gold in Bermuda," the network amplifies the lie instantly. It is 18th century Twitter, and the fake news is viral. Historians still argue about the complicity of the government. The king's mistress was bribed with stock. MPs were given options that guaranteed profit. The coffeehouse chatter wasn't just organic excitement. It was a coordinated pump-on-dump scheme orchestrated by the political elite, using the coffeehouse as the distribution channel for their propaganda. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the crash, and the crash is coming. It happens in September. You are standing in the same alley, but the mood has shifted from euphoria to terror. The price starts to slip, then it falls, then it plummets. You watch the faces of the men around you. The adrenaline is gone, replaced by the cold, sick realization of ruin. The man who bought at £1,000 is trying to sell at £100. No one is buying. The liquidity has evaporated. The scene is apocalyptic. There are reports of suicides. The coffee houses, once loud with bravado, are now filled with the sounds of weeping and violent accusations. The wealth that everyone thought they had, the paper profits, was just smoke. It was never there. The bubble pops, and it leaves a crater in the British economy. But something interesting happens in the wreckage. You look at the survivors. Who are they? They aren't the ones who bet on the undertaking of great advantage. They are the boring guys, the ones who stuck to the shipping insurance, the ones who looked at Lloyd's list and said, "I will only bet on things I can see." The crash of 1720 acts as a massive forest fire. It burns away the underbrush of scammers, dreamers, and perpetual motion salesmen. It forces the government to step in with the Bubble Act, which essentially bans these fly-by-night joint stock companies. The coffeehouse ecosystem is pruned. The gamblers who treated it like a roulette wheel are wiped out or sent to prison. The serious professionals, the insurers, the brokers, the actuaries, are the ones left standing in the ashes. You realize that this disaster was a necessary growing pain. The coffeehouse needed to learn a hard lesson. Trust is fragile. You can't just trust the network, you have to verify the data. The school of the wise had become the school of fools, and the tuition was expensive. As the dust settles, the geography of London's finance begins to solidify. The stock jobbers are pushed into their own exchange. The merchants stick to the Royal Exchange, and the insurers, they cling tighter to the coffeehouses that prioritize facts over hype. But just as the financial landscape is stabilizing, the physical landscape is about to be threatened. The coffeehouses are built of wood. They are lit by candles. They are filled with paper, and they are surrounded by a city that is basically a giant pile of kindling. The system has survived a financial fire. Now, it has to survive a literal one. You leave the depressed gloom of Exchange Alley. You need fresh air. But the wind is picking up, and the sky to the east is turning a strange shade of orange. It's not 1720 anymore. The timeline is jumping back and forth because fires in London are, unfortunately, a recurring theme. But the one we are about to see will reshape the map of insurance forever. Grab a bucket. We're going to the Great Fire and its smaller, nastier cousins. You are coughing, wiping soot from your eyes, standing on the banks of the Thames. We have to rewind the clock. We are jumping back from the financial ruin of 1722, the physical ruin of September 1666. The sky isn't just orange. It is a wall of flame. This is the Great Fire of London, and it is currently eating the medieval city alive. You watch as the timber-framed buildings bonedry from a long, hot summer catch fire like matchsticks. The fire jumps from roof to roof, fueled by the easterly wind. It consumes the warehouses full of oil, tallow, and spirits. It consumes the churches, and yes, it consumes the coffee houses. The penny universities are burning down. The physical servers of the network are melting. But here is the fascinating thing. The network doesn't die. It relocates. You watch as the coffee men, the kidneys, and the patrons flee the inferno. They don't just run home, their homes are burning too. They run to the edges of the fire zone. They set up temporary shops and tents, in surviving stone halls, even in open fields. The addiction to information is so strong that the first thing Londoners try to reconstruct is UNT, the church. It's the place to talk. This disaster is the hard reset that creates the modern financial district. When the smoke finally clears, 4/5 of the city is gone. 13,000 houses are ash. But as you walk through the ruins, you see the opportunity. The city that rises from these ashes isn't the chaotic, winding medieval maze it was before. It is built of brick and stone, it is wider, it is organized, and crucially, it is zoned. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Great Fire forced a geographical sorting of London's trades. Before the fire, merchants and insurers were scattered. After the fire, as the city rebuilt around the Royal Exchange, the financial services clustered tightly together. The coffee houses that reopened in the new alleys around Cornhill and Lombard Street weren't just random hangouts anymore. They were the city. You are witnessing the physical birth of the City of London as a distinct financial entity. But the fire does something else. It creates a new terror. Before 1666, fire was just an act of God. You prayed it wouldn't happen. After 1666, people realized that prayer wasn't a viable risk management strategy. They needed insurance for their homes, not just their ships. You walk into a newly built coffee house smelling of fresh plaster rather than old smokeware. A man named Nicholas Barbon is holding court. He is a doctor turned builder turned financial opportunist. He looks at the fear in the eyes of the Londoners and sees a gold mine. Barbon sets up the fire office later at the Phoenix. It is the world's first property insurance company. And where does he sell his policies? In the coffee house. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Barbon's insurance came with a catch. If you bought a policy, you were given a metal plaque of fire mark to nail to the front of your house. It usually depicted a phoenix or a sun. Why? Because there was no municipal fire department. The insurance companies hired their own private fire brigades. You watch a scene that feels like a dark comedy sketch. A fire breaks out in a row of houses. The private fire brigade rushes in with their pump. They look at the burning house. They look for the metal mark. If they see their company's mark, they fight the fire. If they see a competitor's mark, or no mark at all, they stand back and watch it burn. Sometimes, rival brigades would even fight each other in the street while the house burned down behind them. It is capitalism in its rawest, stupidest form. But it works. The city rebuilds. You notice that the insurers are moving closer to Lloyd's. The marine insurers and the fire insurers are starting to realize they are in the same business. Selling peace of mind, the geography of the coffee houses is becoming a map of risk. If you want to insure a ship, you go to Lloyd's. If you want to insure a house, you go to the coffee house next door, where the friendly society meets. The proximity creates a feedback loop. The actuaries we met in the Mathematician S Corner can now apply their mortality tables and probability theories to fire. They can calculate the likelihood of a brick house burning versus a timber one. They start to influence building codes. The insurers effectively design the new London to be safer, simply because it's cheaper for them. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the rebuilding phase. The air is full of lime dust and lead paint. The new city is a construction site for decades, and the social inequality is stark. The rich rebuild in brick. The poor are pushed into the shantytowns outside the walls. As you walk through the newly paved Exchange Alley, you realize that the coffee house has graduated. It is no longer just a tenant in the building. It is the anchor tenant of the economy. The insurance district is now a physical place you can point to on a map. But there is one type of risk left that they have UNT figured out how to monetize perfectly yet. They have handled the ship's marine insurance. They have handled the building's fire insurance. Now, they are looking at the most unpredictable asset of all, death. We touched on mortality tables earlier, but now we are going to see the dark, gamified version of life insurance. We are leaving the respectable brick offices of the fire office and heading to a darker, weirder corner of the coffeehouse world. You are about to enter a tontine. It sounds like a pasta dish, but it's actually a battle royale where you bet on the death of your neighbors. And yes, it happened over coffee. You leave the scorched earth of the fire office and step into a coffeehouse that feels less like a construction site and more like a parlor game for psychopaths. The year is roughly 1690, and while the fire insurers are busy calculating the flammability of brick versus timber, the men in this room are calculating the flammability of human life. You have entered the world of the tontine. If you think modern life insurance is morbid betting that you will die so your family gets paid, the tontine is the exact opposite. It is a bet that you will live, and more importantly, that everyone else will die. It is a financial battle royale. It is Highlander played with pension funds. You sit down at a table where a group of men are poring over a ledger. They look like they are checking race results, but they aren't looking at horses. They are looking at a list of names of elderly widows and sickly clergymen. Here is how it works. You and 1,000 other people put a sum of money, say £100, into a pot. The organizer, often the government or a private bank, takes that capital and invests it. They pay out the interest as an annual dividend to all the subscribers. So far, so boring. It sounds like a standard bond, but here is the twist. When one of the subscribers dies, their share of the dividend doesn't go to their heirs. It goes to the survivors. You watch the men at the table grinning. One of them just got the news that a fellow subscriber, a merchant from Bristol, has succumbed to gout. They raise their coffee cups in a toast. To poor Thomas, they say, may he rest in peace. But their eyes are saying cha-ching. As the years go by and the subscribers drop like flies, the dividend checks get bigger and bigger. The slice of the pie grows as the number of eaters shrinks. Eventually, there are only a handful of people left, earning absolutely massive sums of money every year. And finally, there is one survivor who takes it all, or continues to draw the massive income until they kick the bucket. This is a mainstream historical fact. The scheme was named after an Italian banker named Lorenzo de' Tonti, who pitched it to the French King Louis XIV as a clever way to raise money for the state. The king needed cash for wars. The people needed a retirement plan. Tonti said, "Why not gamify it?" It became a sensation across Europe. Coffee houses were the primary venues where these subscriptions were sold and traded. You look at the nominees list on the table. This is where it gets really weird. You didn't necessarily have to bet on your own life. You could buy a share in the tontine and name someone else as the life attached to it. If you were a smart investor, you wouldn't pick a fat, winner-drinking 50-year-old. You would pick a child. Specifically, a healthy female child who had already survived smallpox. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In the 18th century, Swiss bankers perfected this system by identifying a group of young girls from elite families in Geneva, the 30 Maidens of Geneva. These girls were healthy, wealthed, and had access to the best health care. The bankers bought massive blocks of tontine shares using these girls as the nominees. It was essentially an index fund of wealthy teenagers. The Geneva maids became celebrities in the financial world. Men in London coffeehouses would eagerly ask, "How is little Marie's cough?" Not because they cared about Marie, but because her cough threatened their yield. You realize that the coffeehouse has turned into a death watch. The runners who used to bring news of ships are now bringing news of obituaries. Good news, gentlemen. The flu season is particularly bad this year. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the paranoia. Imagine being one of the last 5 survivors in a tontine. You know that the other 4 people in the pool are wishing you were dead. Every time you drink a coffee, you check for almond-scented poison. Every time you walk down a dark alley, you wonder if your coinvestors have hired a thug to speed up the process. Fiction writers like Agatha Christie and Robert Louis Stevenson loved the tontine trope because it provided a perfect motive for murder. In reality, most tontine members were boring investors who just waited for nature to take its course. But the incentive for murder was definitely baked into the contract. Historians still argue about the economic morality of the tontine. On one hand, it was a brilliant way to fund public works. Bridges, buildings, and wars were built on tontine money. On the other hand, it was basically state-sponsored gambling that redirected wealth away from families, since you couldn't inherit the principal and toward. A few lucky cents. It was the antithesis of generational wealth. You watch a man in the corner who looks incredibly old-ancient. Really, he is trembling as he lifts his cup. He is the last survivor of a tontine started 40 years ago. He is likely earning thousands of pounds a year just for continuing to breathe. He is the lottery winner of longevity. The younger men look at him with a mix of jealousy and awe. He is the ultimate victor of the coffeehouse game, but the government eventually realizes that tontines are a bad deal for them. The Geneva maids lived too long. The state ended up paying out way more in dividends than they ever raised in capital. They needed a model that was less like a casino and more like ... science. You see a group of men separating themselves from the tontine crowd. They are moving to the chapter coffee house in St. Paul's churchyard. These are the serious mathematicians again. They are looking at the mortality tables and shaking their heads. This betting on death is inefficient, they argue. We should be pooling risk to protect families, not to disinherit them. They are founding the Society for Equitable Assurances on Lives and Survivorships. It's a mouthful, but it's the first modern life insurance company. They decide that instead of premiums based on guessing, they will charge premiums based on age and health status, calculated by actuaries. You are witnessing the transition from gambling on death to hedging against death. But the tontine idea doesn't die easily. It is too addictive. It travels. It gets on a ship and crosses the Atlantic. It lands in a small, booming port city called New York. You finish your coffee carefully checking it for arsenic, just in case. You leave the morbid atmosphere of the London tontine scene. You are heading to the docks again. We are going to America. Because in the New World, the coffee house isn't just going to facilitate insurance, it's going to build Wall Street. And the most famous building on that street, it's going to be named after this exact weird death betting game. Pack your bags. We're going to the Tontine Coffee House in Manhattan. You step off a packet ship onto the wooden slips of the East River. The air here is different from London. It's sharper, colder, and lacks the ancient heavy smog of coal. Instead, it smells of raw timber, molasses, and fresh ambition. You are in New York City. The year is roughly 1793. You walk up Wall Street. It's not the canyon of skyscrapers you know today. It's a muddy, bustling thoroughfare lined with three-story brick buildings. But there is one building that dominates the scene, standing proudly on the corner of Wall and Water Streets. It has a high porch, a slate roof, and an aura of frantic energy. This is the Tontine Coffee House. If Lloyd's was the engine room of the British Empire, the Tontine is the incubator of the American dream. You walk up the steps and push through the doors into the main room. It is massive, the ceiling is high, the windows are tall, and the noise is deafening. You are standing in the first true headquarters of the New York Stock Exchange. Here is the continuity check. Remember that weird death betting scheme from the last section, the Tontine? Well, this building exists because of it. A group of New York merchants wanted a place to do business that was fancier than the tavern but more exclusive than the street. So, they organized a tontine. They sold 203 shares at $200 each. The survivors would inherit the building. They literally crowdfunded their own clubhouse using the financial gamification techniques imported from London. You find a spot near the massive fireplace. The crowd here is a who's who of early American capitalism. You see men in knee breeches and powdered wigs, but the vibe is less aristocratic leisure and more desperate hustle. These men are building a financial system from scratch. This is a mainstream historical fact. Before the New York Stock Exchange had a trading floor with bells and screens, it had the Tontine Coffee House. The brokers didn't have offices. They came here. They stood in this room from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you wanted to buy shares in the First Bank of the United States or insurance for a cargo of tobacco, you didn't call a broker. You just walked into the Tontine and shouted, "Who's selling?" You watch a man stand on a chair, recurring theme in our story. He is auctioning off shares of a canal company. The bidding is fierce. There is no regulation here. It is pure, unadulterated market forces at work. But look closer at the books on the tables. They aren't just ledgers. There are two books kept at the Tontine that are considered sacred. One is for ship arrivals, a direct copy of the Lloyd's model. The other is a book of political bets. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The Tontine was the Vegas sports book of the 1790s. You could bet on anything. You could bet on whether George Washington would run for a third term. You could bet on the outcome of the French Revolution. You could bet on how long it would take a letter to get to Philadelphia. These bets weren't just for fun. They were a way of hedging political risk. If you were a merchant whose business depended on peace with France, you might bet that war would break out just to cover your potential losses. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the social pressure here. The Tontine wasn't a public Starbucks, it was a club. While technically open to the public, the merchant aristocracy ruled the room. If you were an outsider, a debtor, or just someone with bad credit, the silence that would fall when you entered would be crushing. You would be frozen out of the conversation. And in an economy that runs on word of mouth, silence is bankruptcy. You notice a group of men huddled in a corner, looking secretive. They aren't shouting, they are whispering. These are the signatories of the Buttonwood Agreement. A year earlier, in 1792, 24 brokers gathered under a buttonwood tree just outside this building at 68 Wall Street and signed a pact to trade only with each other and to charge a fixed commission. It was the beginning of a cartel, but trees are cold in the winter and wet in the rain. So the cartel moved inside. The Tontine is the physical shell for the buttonwood spirit. You watch them trading. They are passing slips of paper back and forth, the same slips we saw in London. The DNA of the Ottoman coffee house has mutated. It crossed the Balkans, refined itself in Vienna, monetized itself in London, and now, in New York, it is becoming weaponized. The American coffee house is faster, louder, and more aggressive. In London, they break for tea. Here, they drink coffee all day. The caffeine consumption is staggering. But there is a dark stain on this floor that we cannot ignore. You see a man posting a notice on the wall. It's not for stocks. It's not for insurance. It is an advertisement for the sale of enslaved people. To be sold at the Tontine Coffee House, a likely Negro wench, 22 years of age, this is the brutal reality of the era. The financial tools developed in the coffee house insurance, credit auctioning, were applied indiscriminately to all forms of property, including human beings. The same room that gave birth to American liberty's financial engine also facilitated its greatest sin. The Tontine was a marketplace for everything, and that included the bodies of the labor force that was powering the cotton boom. You walk away from that notice feeling a chill that has nothing to do with the drafty door. You move back to the trading floor. The volume is rising. It's getting too loud. The problem with the Tontine with the coffee house model in general is scalability. You can only fit so many people in a room before it becomes a mosh pit. As the American economy explodes in the early 19th century, the coffee house can't contain the action. Merchants are complaining. I can't hear the auctioneer. Someone spilled coffee on my ledger. There are too many tourists. The casual, chaotic, open-access nature of the coffee house, which was its greatest strength for 300 years, is now becoming a liability. The serious money wants privacy. They want rules. They want a building where you can just walk in off the street and buy a coffee. They want an institution. You watch a group of senior brokers looking up at the ceiling, annoyed by the noise. They are plotting an exit. They are planning to leave the coffee house behind and build a dedicated exchange. You are witnessing the end of an era. The coffee house has done its job. It incubated the global financial system. It nursed it from a goat herder-esque buzz to a merchant-esque desk to a global network. But the child has outgrown the nursery. The corporate shift is coming. The informal networks of trust are about to be replaced by the rigid structures of corporate law. The kidneys are about to be replaced by clerks. The box is about to become the boardroom. You finish your cup of weak American-style coffee, which is already becoming distinct from the thick Turkish brew or the milky Viennese blend. You step out onto Wall Street. The sun is setting over Trinity Church. The Tontine stands tall, glowing with candlelight, a beacon of commerce. But inside, the clock is ticking. The Tontine won't survive. It will eventually be turned into offices, then demolished. The spirit of the coffee house will be distilled, sterilized, and moved into the marble halls of the New York Stock Exchange and the boardrooms of London. We are going to travel back across the ocean now to London to see the final transformation. We are going to see Lloyd's finally leave the coffee house and become a corporation. The bean is being left behind, but the caffeine addiction is now structural. You are standing on the steps of the Royal Exchange in London. The year is 1871. The air is thick with the soot of the Industrial Revolution. But the chaos of the 17th century alleyways is gone. The narrow, muddy lanes where runners dodged carts have been replaced by paved streets and imposing stone facades. You are witnessing the end of the coffee house as a place and its rebirth as a brand. You walk through the heavy iron gates and into the subscribers' room of the new Lloyd S. The first thing you notice is the silence. Well, not total silence, but a controlled, disciplined hum. The raucous shouting of the candle auction is gone. The clouds of tobacco smoke are thinner. The smell of roasting beans has been replaced by the smell of beeswax polish and expensive cologne. You are witnessing the corporate shift. For nearly 2 centuries, Lloyd's was just a guy's name on a coffee shop door. It was a loose collection of individuals who gathered in a room to drink caffeine and bet on ships. But as the British Empire grew to cover a quarter of the globe, that loose collection became dangerous. There were too many scammers, too many bubble bets, and too much risk for a system based on a handshake and a nod. So, the waiters, the staff, became the committee. The regulars became subscribers, and the coffeehouse became the society. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Lloyd's Act of 1871 was passed by Parliament, formally incorporating the Society of Lloyd's as a legal entity. It gave the committee the power to create bylaws, to vet members, and most importantly, to kick people out. Before this, if a man didn't pay his debts, you could only shun him. Now, you could legally expel him and strip him of his livelihood. You look around the room, the boxers are still here, those high-backed wooden booths where the underwriters sit, but they are uniform. Now mahogany, polished, permanent. The underwriters aren't just wealthy merchants with a side hustle. They are full-time professionals. They check their pocket watches, not the sun. You approach a desk. You want to buy insurance. In the old days, you'd just shout your offer to the room. Now you have to go through a broker. The roles have rigidified. You are either an underwriter who accepts the risk or a broker who brings the business. You cannot be both. The conflict of interest that fueled the coffeehouse betting culture has been legislated out of existence. Here, as a quirky tidbit for you, even though they left the actual coffee shop behind long ago, the staff at Lloyd's are still called waiters. The head attendant is the head waiter. They wear long red robes called liveries and top hats, looking like they stepped out of a Dickens novel. It is a stubborn refusal to let go of their barista heritage. They don't serve coffee anymore, they serve information, but the title remains a linguistic fossil of the days when their main job was refilling your cup. You watch the head waiter walk to a rostrum in the center of the room. He isn't holding a coffee pot, he is holding a mallet. Above him hangs a massive ship's bell, salvaged from the bottom of the sea. This is the lutein bell. You watch him strike it, clang, just once. The room freezes, every pen stops, every conversation halts. 1 ring means a ship is lost. 2 rings means a ship, previously thought lost, has arrived safely. The bell is the voice of the ocean, mediated by the corporation. It is a ritual that turns tragedy into data. The underwriters check their books. If they wrote a line on that ship, they calculate their loss. Then, they go back to work. This is the cold efficiency of the corporate era. The emotion of the gamble has been stripped away. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the vetting process to even get in the door. In the penny university days, your admission fee was, well, a penny. Now, you need to show assets of at least £100,000, a staggering sum in the 19th century. You need sponsorship from existing members. You need to pass an interview where a panel of unsmiling men judges your character. The school of the wise has become the club of the rich. The democratic spirit of the coffee house, where a chimney sweep could sit next to a duke, is dead. The doors are locked. The public is kept behind a barrier. The flow of information, once open to anyone with ears, is now proprietary. Historians still argue about whether this ossification was a good thing. Some economic historians claim that without this rigid structure, the insurance market would have collapsed under the weight of fraud. The Wild West had to be tamed to support the scale of industrial shipping. Others argue that something vital was lost, that the creative, chaotic energy of the coffee house was the engine of innovation, and the corporation just became a gatekeeper protecting the establishment. You walk through the room, observing the sheer scale of the operation. There are telegraph wires running directly into the building now. The runners have been replaced by Morse code. News from Singapore arrives in minutes, not months. The list is now a massive publication, printed on industrial presses. The coffee is gone, but the addiction to speed remains. You stop at a station where a clerk is entering data into a massive ledger. This is the Lost Book. It records every major disaster in the world. Fire in Chicago. It's in the book. Earthquake in Lisbon. In the book. Hurricane in the Caribbean. In the book, you realize that this room is the shock absorber for the global economy. When a factory burns down in Manchester, The money to rebuild it comes from this room. When a tea clipper sinks in the China Sea, the bank loans are repaid from this room. The coffee house has become the invisible safety net that allows the Industrial Revolution to happen. No factory owner would build a £1,000,000 mill if he couldn't insure it. No captain would sail a steel steamship if he carried all the risk himself. The modern world is being built on the foundation of these promises. But as the institution grows larger, stiffer, and more arrogant, it begins to believe its own hype. The underwriters start to think they have mastered risk. They have the telegraph, they have the steamship, they have the Act of Parliament, they have the bell. They think they are unsinkable. The 20th century is approaching. The ships are getting bigger. The technology is getting more complex. And the ocean is waiting to remind these men in their mahogany boxes that nature does not care about their Act of Parliament. You leave the subscribers' room, passing the redrobed waiter, you step back out into the London fog. The era of the coffee house is officially over. The era of big insurance has begun. But the ultimate test of this new system isn't a legal challenge or a market crash. It is a literal iceberg. You are about to fast forward a few decades to 1912. You are going to see what happens when the unsinkable meets the inevitable, and you are going to see if the system built by coffee drinkers can actually pay the bill. Get your life jacket. We are going to the North Atlantic. You are standing in the underwriting room at the Royal Exchange. The date is April 16, 1912. The air is heavy, buzzing with a frenetic energy that feels less like business and more like a wake. The mahogany boxers are crowded. The waiters in their red robes are moving with unusual urgency. You are witnessing the coffee house system's greatest stress test. Yesterday, the news hit the floor like a physical blow. The RMS Titanic, the floating palace, the ship that was mathematically declared practically unsinkable by the very engineers who built her, has gone down. At first, nobody believed it. You watched the older underwriters shaking their heads, but the telegraphs kept clicking. Sinking, sunk, heavy loss of life. Now, the denial has evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard arithmetic of liability. You watch a clerk writing on a chalkboard. The numbers are staggering. The hull alone was insured for £1 million, roughly £100 million today. The cargo diamonds, feathers, fine wines, a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, bound in jewels adds millions more. And then there are the liability claims for the lives lost. This is the moment where the coffeehouse model either works or collapses. In a standard corporate environment, a loss this big would trigger an army of lawyers. They would look for loopholes. They would argue force majeure. They would delay payment for years, hoping the claimants would give up or die. But Lloyd's runs on the memory of the coffeehouse. It runs on Uberame Fideatmost. Good faith, this is a mainstream historical fact. Lloyd S. of London settled the Titanic claims within 30 days. There was no litigation, there was no quibbling. The lead underwriters looked at the slip, saw their signatures, and authorized the payment. It was a financial bloodletting that nearly bankrupted several syndicates, but they paid. You watch the transaction happen. It isn't a dramatic ceremony. It's just a check being signed. But the symbolism is powerful. By paying the biggest claim in history without blinking, Lloyd's buys something more valuable than the money it lost. It buys immortality. The message sent to the world is clear. If the world ends, we will write the check. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Despite the massive payout, the Titanic disaster actually made money for the insurance market in the long run. How? Because the day after the sinking, insurance premiums for every other ship in the world skyrocketed. The unsinkable discount vanished overnight. Every captain, every ship owner, every merchant suddenly realized that the ocean was still dangerous. They rushed to buy more coverage at higher rates. The disaster terrified the market into profitability. You look at the faces of the underwriters in their boxes. They are grim, but they aren't panicking. They are Remember the syndicate concept. The risk of the Titanic was spread so thin, chopped into such tiny slices across hundreds of underwriters and dozens of insurance companies, that no single person was wiped out. The coffeehouse network distributed the weight of the iceberg across thousands of wallets, so that, while everyone felt the pinch, no one broke their back. Historians still argue about the role of insurance in the tragedy itself. Some scholars suggest that the unsinkable hype was partly a marketing ploy to drive down insurance premiums. By convincing the underwriters that the ship was safe, the White Star Line saved a fortune in operating costs. The financial hubris of the City of London fed the operational hubris of the captain on the bridge. The coffee house whispered it's safe, so the captain steamed ahead at full speed into the dark. You walk over to the Lutein bell, it hangs silent today. Contrary to popular belief, they didn't ring it for the Titanic immediately, largely because the news was so confused and confirmed so piecemeal. But the silence of the bell is almost louder. The room knows. This event marks the final maturity of the system. The goat herder's buzz has become a global shield. The risk that was once a gamble between two guys in a smoky room is now a formalized product that underpins civilization. You realize that without this payout, the modern world stops. If Lloyd's had defaulted on the Titanic, who would insure the first airplanes? Who would insure the first nuclear power plants? Who would insure the satellites? The trust established in this room over the wreckage of a luxury liner allows the 20th century to happen. But as you watch the clerks file away the paperwork for the Titanic, you realize that the story isn't over. The coffee house has been formalized, institutionalized, and sanitized. But the invisible lines it created, the networks of trust, the flow of information, the shared risk, have escaped the building. They have gone digital. You are about to leave the 1912 underwriting room. You are going to fast forward through the wars, through the invention of the computer, through the internet. You are going to see that the coffee house didn't disappear. It just went into the cloud. The web of trade that started with a camel caravan is now wrapping around the entire planet. And you are caught in it right now, whether you realize it or not. You are standing on the observation deck of a massive container port, maybe Shanghai, Rotterdam, or Los Angeles. The air smells of diesel and sea salt, but the noise is different. It's not the shouting of the coffee house or the ringing of the Lutein bell. It's the low, constant hum of automation. Massive cranes, guided by computers, lift 40-foot steel boxes from ships the size of skyscrapers. You are looking at the invisible web. Every single one of those containers, millions of them stacked like Lego bricks, wrapped in a layer of invisible paper. It has a bill of lading from the merchant, a letter of credit from the banker, and an insurance policy from the underwriter. Without that paper, the crane doesn't move, the ship doesn't sail, the world stops. You realize that the system we watched evolve from a goat herder-esque buzz to a London coffee house has disappeared. It has just scaled up to a level that is almost impossible for the human mind to comprehend. The coffee house is no longer a room. It is the atmosphere of the global economy. Let's trace the invisible thread. You pull your smartphone out of your pocket. It was assembled in Shenzhen. The screen came from Korea. The chips were designed in California. The cobalt in the battery came from the Congo. How did all these parts get to the same factory at the same time without someone getting ripped off, robbed, or sued? Because of the protocols invented in 1555 Istanbul and 1688 London, this is a mainstream historical fact. The concept of general average, the rule that if a ship is in danger and cargo must be thrown overboard to save it, everyone shares the losses, still the bedrock of maritime law. It's a principle that predates the coffee house but was codified within its walls. If a container of sneakers falls off a ship in a storm today, the guy shipping the electronics on the same boat pays a fraction of the cost. We are all still financially huddled in the same wooden boat, sharing the risk. But the modern coffee house has moved to the cloud. The runner sprinting from the docks is now a fiber optic cable flashing high frequency, trading algorithms between New York and London in microseconds. The candle auction is now a programmatic ad exchange or an eBay bid. Yet, the social etiquette remains surprisingly intact. Here, as a quirky tidbit for you, in the highest levels of global reinsurance, the people who insure the insurance companies against mega disasters like hurricanes or pandemics business is still often done face-to-face, or at least voice-to-voice. The motto of the London Stock Exchange, dicta meum pactum, my word is my bond, is a direct inheritance from the coffeehouse days. When billions of dollars are on the line, contracts are often still agreed upon verbally before the lawyers ever type a word. The handshake in the smoke-filled room is still the ultimate currency of trust. You watch a ship pull away from the dock. It is heading into international waters, a lawless void. Who protects it? Not a navy, a contract. The same Uberame Fidei, utmost good faith. that Lloyd S. demanded in 1700 is the only thing preventing the global supply chain from collapsing into piracy and fraud. But the risks have mutated. The underwriters today aren't just looking at storm charts. They are looking at cyber risk. Imagine a modern coffeehouse discussion. It's not about the wind. It's about the firewall. If a hacker in a basement shuts down the Colonial Pipeline, who pays? The insurers are scrambling to figure this out. Just like they scrambled to figure out the mortality tables in the 17th century, they are gathering data. They are trying to price the unknown. It is the same game, just with different monsters. Historians and economists still argue about whether we have lost something vital in this digital transition. In the Ottoman coffeehouse, the network was human. It had empathy, intuition, and shame. If you cheated someone, you had to look them in the eye. In the algorithmic coffeehouse of today, the network is cold. Flash crashes happen because computers react to data without understanding context. Some argue that by removing the caffeine-fueled gossip from the loop, we have made the system more efficient, but more brittle. We have removed the human circuit breaker. You look at the port again, it seems mechanical, inevitable. But it is fragile. A single ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, remember, the Ever Given can throw the entire global school of the wise into panic. When that ship got stuck, what happened? The insurance rates spiked. The runners, now news anchors, shouted. The merchants panicked. The system reacted exactly as it would have in Edward Lloyd's shop, just with better graphics. You realize that the invisible web isn't just about money. It's about permission. The insurance certificate is the permission slip for innovation. Elon Musk wants to launch a rocket. He needs insurance. A pharmaceutical company wants to test a new vaccine. They need liability coverage. A construction firm wants to build a mile-high tower. They need a policy. The underwriter is the gatekeeper of the future. If they refuse to sign the slip, the future doesn't happen. The rocket stays on the pad. The tower stays on the blueprint. The betting man in the back of the coffeehouse is effectively deciding which timeline we get to live in, and what fuels this decision-making process. Still, largely coffee. Walk into any trading floor on Wall Street, any insurance brokerage in Bermuda, any shipping office in Singapore at 6 a.m. What do you smell? It's not tea. It's not juice. It is the dark, bitter bean of Ethiopia. The drug of choice for the capitalist class hasn't changed in 500 years. We are still running the global operating system on the same chemical stimulant that made the goats dance. You pull up a news app on your phone, you see a headline about a trade war, or a drought affecting crop yields, or a new tech IPO. You are now a patron of the coffeehouse. You are consuming the gossip. You are assessing the risk. You are part of the swarm. The physical walls of Kiva, Han, and the Tontine have dissolved, but the architecture remains in your pocket. You are connected to the merchant in Shanghai, the broker in London, and the farmer in Brazil. But as we prepare to leave this observation deck and wrap up our journey, we need to bring it back down to the micro level. We need to look at the cup in your hand, because after all this talk of empires, fire, and billions of dollars, the most enduring legacy of this revolution isn't the insurance policy or the stock ticker, it is the ritual. You turn away from the massive ships, you need a drink. You walk toward a small kiosk at the edge of the port. You order a coffee. As you wait for the barista, the modern cavechi, to pour the shot, you are about to take the final step. You are going to realize that you are the artifact. You are the living history. Let's take that final sip together. You are standing at the counter of a small, brightly lit shop. The barista hands you a paper cup with a plastic lid, or maybe a ceramic mug if you're staying in. You feel the heat radiating through the material against your palm. You lift it to your nose. That smell roasted, nutty, slightly acidic hits your olfactory bulb and triggers a cascade of anticipation in your brain. You are holding the final artifact of our journey. Look at the liquid inside. It looks innocent enough. It's just a suspension of ground seed particles in hot water. But now, you know better. You are holding a cup of revolutions. You are drinking the same chemical compound that made the goats dance in Ethiopia, that kept the Sufis chanting in Yemen, that scared the Sultan in Istanbul, and that fueled the gamblers in London. You take a sip. The bitterness hits your tongue, followed by the warmth. This brings us to a quirky tidbit to illustrate just how far we've come in understanding this drink. In the 18th century, King Gustav III of Sweden was convinced that coffee was a slow-acting poison. He was determined to prove it scientifically. He commuted the death sentences of two twin brothers convicted of murder on one condition. One had to drink a massive amount of tea every day, and the other had to drink a massive amount of coffee. It was the world's first clinical trial on caffeine. The result? The doctors monitoring the experiment died first. The king was assassinated. The tea drinker died at age 83. The coffee drinker, he outlived them all. You are the beneficiary of that experiment. You don't fear the bean, you rely on it. But consider what this cup represents economically. It is the fuel of the modern workforce. Historians and sociologists still argue about the great sobering. Did coffee liberate us by sharpening our minds for the Enlightenment? Or did it enslave us to capitalism by allowing us to work unnaturally long hours? Before coffee, you worked while the sun was up. Now, with this cup in your hand, you are an economic unit that can function at 9 p.m. or 4 a.m. You have ensured your own productivity. Think about the third place we talked about, the Ottoman Kivahan. Look around you. People are sitting at tables with laptops, wearing noise-canceling headphones. They are alone together. The conversation has moved to Slack or Zoom, but the physical need to be surrounded by other humans while consuming a stimulant remains exactly the same. The coffee shop is still the office for the person who has no office. It is still the living room for the person who wants to escape their house. And what about the insurance? The financial safety net we spent so much time exploring. Every time you swipe your card to pay for this coffee, a nanosecond transaction travels through the invisible web we described. The bank guarantees the payment, the merchant pays a fee. The shipping company that brought the beans is insured against piracy. The farmer in Brazil likely has crop insurance against frost. Your $5 latte is the tip of an iceberg made of risk management. It is a miracle of logistics that only exists because a bunch of guys in wigs in 1688 decided to stop gambling on ships and start calculating the odds. This is a mainstream historical fact. Coffee remains one of the most valuable legally traded commodities in the world. Second only to oil in some metrics, though. This is often debated depending on how you count value. But the parallel is striking. Oil fuels the machines. Coffee fuels the people who design the machines. You take another sip. The caffeine is hitting your bloodstream now. You feel that familiar lift, the fog clearing, the focus sharpening. It is the same sensation Caldi felt on the mountain. It is the biological constant in a world of changing variables. You walk out of the shop and onto the street. The world is moving fast. Cars, phones, markets, data. It can feel overwhelming. It feels chaotic, just like the crowded alleyways of 17th century London. But you are armed. You have your cup. You have your small personal insurance policy against the fatigue of existence. As you walk, you realize that the story of coffee isn't just history, it's a continuous loop. Somewhere in Ethiopia right now, a wild coffee bush is blooming. Somewhere in Istanbul, a fortune teller is reading the grounds in a cup. Somewhere in London, an underwriter is looking at a risk model on a screen. And here you are, carrying the fire. The network is complete. The goat, the monk, the spy, the merchant, the actuary, and you. You are all sitting at the same table, spanning 1,000 years, passing the pot, keeping the conversation going, and making sure that when the candle finally burns down, you are awake enough to see the light. The steam rises from your cup, curling into the air, vanishing like a ghost. It's time to finish the drink. It's time to get back to work. Or maybe, just maybe, it's time to order another one and stay a little longer. After all, the rent on the table is cheap, and the gossip is just getting good. Wind down now. Slow your breathing. Let the noise of the coffee house fade away. The shouting of the brokers in the tontine, the clanging of the lutein bell, the scratching of the quill pens in the candlelight. Let it all drift into silence. The frantic energy of the trading floor is settling. The ships have all docked safely in the harbor. The ledgers are closed and locked away in the heavy wooden chests. The runners have stopped sprinting. They are resting now, leaning against the warm brick walls of the alleyway. Picture the steam rising from that final cup we just held. Watch it swirl in the quiet air, white and soft, dancing slowly like a spirit before dissolving into nothingness. The fire in the hearth has burned down to glowing embers, casting a warm orange light across the empty room. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn against the night. You have traveled a long way tonight. You walked the high mountains of Ethiopia, sailed the rough seas of the Atlantic, and sat in the smoky corners of London. You witnessed the birth of the modern world, built on anxiety and caffeine, But now, the risk is calculated. The danger is insured. You are safe. There are no more bets to place. There are no more storms to weather. The SG on the policy is signed. You have utmost good faith that the night will be peaceful. Let the caffeine fade from your system, replaced by a heavy, comforting calm. The history is written. The books are balanced. The world will keep spinning while you rest, protected by the invisible web we trace together. Close your eyes. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm coat.